All right. Welcome, everyone. Today we have Kevin Symonds with us for today's AMA. Kevin joins us from, I believe it was North Dakota?
Yes.
Yeah. And a lot of you have asked questions already. We're hoping to get through as many as we can. Kevin can't stick around for too long, but we'll go for as long as he's able to. And we'll see how many questions we get through. Um,
Well, I'm hoping to get through them all, and I don't mind if you want to tell them why.
yeah, well, so Kevin's a little under the weather today, and we want to make sure that you're feeling all right and able to keep talking. Um, but let's see here. Well,
Thank
let's go
you.
ahead and start out with a prayer, and then we'll get going. In the name of the Father, Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Lord, give us your words to speak. Help us to always turn to you in our heart in confidence so that you are the source of all truth and goodness. May that truth and goodness come forth from us each and every day. Jesus, we trust in you. All of this we lift up to you, Father, as we pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Well, get things started. We've got our first question here comes from Error. Uh,
Would it be best if I just said a little bit about myself? Just kind of
yeah, sure.
orienting everybody?
Why don't you give a quick little introduction?
All right. Well, I am 41 years old. I live in North Dakota, Diocese of Bismarck, and I'm originally from the greater Boston area. And it is true, we do park the car in the garage in the corner of Harvard Yard. That is very true. I was educated at Franciscan University of Steubenville with my bachelor's and master's degrees in theology with a background in the classical languages of Greek and Latin. 2003 with my bachelor's, 2006 with my master's. And I've always had an interest in all things mystical. And it wasn't until I became Catholic that I discovered, shall we say, the true mysticism, as it were, and the theology of stuff. So it was very fascinating how it all kind of worked together. There's a whole conversion story there as well. So maybe we can get to that if we have some time later on, if anybody's interested. But I work for an apostolate, in Catholic apostolate in Michigan. I work remotely, of course, and I also have a part-time job. So shout out to my peeps at Dollar General. Uh, um, they work hard. They do. They work hard and under very serious circumstances. So that's good. Uh, I have 3 books out. 2 were published in 2015. Refractions of Light, 201 Answers on Apparitions, Visions in the Catholic Church. The second one later that year was Pope Leo XIII and the Prayer to St. Michael. That goes over the history of Pope Leo's vision. Did he have one? And did it inspire the famous St. Michael the Archangel prayer that a lot of people are very well aware of and are very fond of? And then 2 years later, that was followed up with my book on the third part of The Secret of Fatima, which was kind of an outgrowth of some of the research for the St. Michael book. I'm actually presently preparing it for a second edition. To more on that maybe a little bit later, but there's also a second edition of the St. Michael book that was published in the August of 2018. So there we go. That's basic nuts and bolts.
Awesome. All right then. Well, yeah. So, like I said, let's start with Error's question here. Error says, "Hello. What is your opinion on Our Lady of Good Success slash the event, and do you think it has credible evidence to be worthy of belief? Do you think the predictions are true?"
Yes, I'm familiar with this particular apparition. These involve the story of Madre Mariana de Jesus Torres de Beria Choa in the Quito, Ecuador area of South America. They were Spanish sisters that went to Ecuador from Spain, of course, and they founded a convent there, which is still in existence today. And they were very famous revelations because Madre Mariana was a very holy woman, and Our Lady had made some very, very profound prophecies to Madre Mariana. And let's see, especially with respect to the 20th century. Some very, very specific prophecies were made about the 20th century, especially with respect to the state of the clergy, which a lot of people take as gospel truth for, present day explanations for the sex scandals and the present malaise that we are experiencing in the church. But it also has to do with the nature of vocations, and that's a little underappreciated. It's a very underappreciated aspect of these particular revelations. And they are called Our Lady of Good Success, although there is a movement that I became aware of 5 years ago that they're trying to keep it in the original Spanish. Nuestra Señora del Buen Suceso. I think that's how you say it. My Spanish is not the best, because good success, something gets lost in translation. But here's the catch with these particular apparitions. They took place in the late 15 or into the 1600s, and the original documents are largely lost to us. They are part of a series, or kind of they're known as the Quadernon. And over time, over the centuries, these documents became lost. But in the 1700s, there was a priest who was very devoted to Madre Mariana, and he wrote a biography, or really a hagiography of her, in, I believe, the Spanish language. And Marian Horvat from, I think it's Tradition in Action, I want to say, is the name of the organization. Marian Horvat issued an English translation of the Spanish textbook here. You can, if you know where to look, you can find the Spanish original. It is for sale in contemporary reprint. It's in 3 volumes. There's a group down in Florida that sells them. I do have them, along with the English, of course. And they are beautiful. It's a beautiful story. I mean, the priest wrote very, very well of Madre Mariana. And I think the revelations to her are inseparable to the witness of her life. They are inseparable from the witness of her life. So you have to read them together to understand the main thrust of what Our Lady was driving at. As far as their official status with the church, I don't know if they are formally approved or not. I have not personally seen a document from the local ecclesiastical authorities, but they are very piously believed by a lot of people. And as I said, I believe it to be very inspiring myself. And in fact, I cited one of Madre Mariana's visions in the second edition of the St. Michael book. So I very much have thoughts about it. Some people argue that there's a connection between Quito and Fatima, for instance. I think that you could make some good connections there, very carefully done. You can't just, slap it together. You have to be very carefully done, because otherwise people can go, off the rails. But overall, I do tend to believe them personally, but I of course would always defer to what the local diocese and the local ordinary has to say.
Great. Okay. From Gebs, she says, "Greetings, Kevin. What's your favorite Marian apparition of all, and why?"
Fatima. Because it was such an explosion of the supernatural, as one writer put it. We're still picking up the pieces to it 105 years later. There's such a profoundness or a profundity to Fatima. And some people have picked up on this to say that it actually is like a fulfillment of divine prophecy that was mentioned in the scriptures. I have yet to see a full justification for that, but that's how far some people take this particular argument. I don't subscribe to that myself. But Our Lady's message was so concise and very, very beautiful, and you can spend a very long time meditating upon the simplicity of it, just the simplicity of it alone. Just say nothing of the content, of course. Um, and all she does is just reiterate basic gospel things: pray, sacrifice, make reparation, fast, um, and have devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, as she says, the pathway that will lead people to God. And I really think that kind of encapsulated. God spoke to mankind through Fatima in order to draw us back to Himself, giving us His mother, who understands God and Jesus the best. I mean, she bore him, she raised him. Who better than Jesus' mother? So that's the beauty underlying the devotion to the Immaculate Heart, as composed to Fatima. Is it's really a reiteration of things like Marian doctrine is, for instance, found in Saint Louis de Montfort, as well as the perennial church teaching on the subject. So yes, hands down, Fatima, for these reasons and probably a lot more that I just can't get to at this time.
All right. Um, from R2, he says, has there ever been a case of people predicting where a Marian apparition would appear?
I saw this question and I was trying to rack my brain. When you work two jobs, it's a little hard to, have the leisure to research it properly. But I was trying to rack my brain. I couldn't recall a specific instance, but I suspect that it's very likely that it would. I mean, we have 2,000 years at some point in time. If somebody did that, I wouldn't be surprised. Unfortunately, I just can't point to a specific uh, point at this time. I don't think Fatima would count because Our Lady appeared first and told them that she'd appear on the 13th day of each month from May till October 1917. So I don't really know if that one would count, because I think the question is more about just out of the blue. Someone says, "Hey, Mary's going to appear here on this day." I can't recall any of the specifics, but if the person wanted to reiterate their request, you are welcome to send me a message here on Discord, and I can ask around fellow Mariologists and just kind of say, "Hey, do you guys know anything about this question? Can you help me out here? Because I'm trying to help out this person over here." So I'd be happy to do that for you if you would like.
Some. From Jeremy, he says, "Hey Kevin, on behalf of the mod team, I'd like to thank you for accepting our invitation to host an AMA with us. We're greatly honored. My question is this: in the video Pius XII, Fatima, and the Destruction of the Liturgy with Kevin Symonds, released by Reason and Theology, you mentioned that you know the Bugnini Masonic briefcase story is true. Can you tell us more about that? How do you think Archbishop Bugnini's membership in the Freemasons affected his decisions in the Roman Curia? And is Cardinal Stickler's assertion that Bugnini was dismissed by Paul VI for something worse than Freemasonry true or false in light of his Masonic membership?"
Oh, Mystic Jeremy, you ask a loaded question in the non-logical fallacy sense of that expression. Um, Yes, just to be clear, a few weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, I recently did a video with Michael Lofton talking about a famous text attributed to Pope Pius XII that was found in the book Pieds douze devant l'Histoire. And during the course of that broadcast, I had made a very stark statement about the famous Bonini story, and I stated for all the world to hear that the Bunini briefcase story, at least in its general components, like there was a briefcase that was found, it had incriminating documents, etc. That the briefcase story in its generals is true, and I know this because the priest who found the briefcase is still alive, and I know somebody who knows that priest. But the priest will, so we have a mutual acquaintance, shall we say? And but the priest will not talk because he is afraid for his life. if you look up the Italian expression anni di piombo, they refer to the years 1968 to about 1982 in in Italy's history, and it actually has its own Wikipedia entry. That's how serious this is. And that's anni di piombo is an Italian expression meaning the years of lead, because during those years there were a lot of killings, and so you were shot, you were hung. I mean, all kinds of terrible things. So the Italians called them the years of lead. And the priest who, as I am told, who found Bunini's briefcase is afraid to speak up because he remembers those years very well, and he doesn't want to basically lose his head. Um, and I do not know the name of the priest. I do know where he ended up, but I don't know, or where he went at least in one point of his life, but I don't know the name. Our mutual acquaintance basically has been told not to communicate that information to me. And so that's the general background to this. Why is this a big deal? Is, I think, kind of wrapped up in this as well. It's a big deal because Bunini, Archbishop Annibale Bunini, was the secretary to the Concilium. And the Concilium was the group that was formed during Vatican II, or just after, somewhere into that time frame, in order to implement Vatican II's document on the liturgy, Sacrosanctum Concilium. And if you know, over in Rome, there are the different department heads at the Vatican. You have the prefect, but then you have the secretary. And even though the prefect does a lot, the secretaries are basically the ones who make sure the trains are running smoothly. So Bunini was the secretary to this particular group, this section there in Rome that dealt with implementing the liturgical reform. Well, here's the question. If you have a man who either is a Freemason or is sympathetic towards Freemasonic ideals, running the show over the liturgical reforms, you have to ask yourself, did he implement things according to the mind of the Council of Fathers, or did he sneak in some things that were not proper, that were not what the Council of Fathers wanted? That's the question at the crux of all of this. And this has long been a debated point among that group of Catholics known as the traditionalists, from roughly about 1976 to the present. There were early stories. It was a alleged list of all of the Freemasons working at the Vatican that was published. Well, that list was bunk. It was basically a false document that was meant to just make it sound so absurd, with some of these names that were on it. Bunini's name did appear on it, though. Father Brian Harrison, who was an oblate of wisdom, wrote an article for a publication, I think it was called 82,000, I want to say, and he made mention of this, so I refer people to that article. I think it's still available online if you know where to look. So it's been debated off and on, but the story goes that Bunini's briefcase he left behind his briefcase in a conference room or some room at the Vatican. And somebody went in there after the meeting, found the briefcase, but there were no identifying markers on the briefcase. So they had to open it up. And when the briefcase was opened up, it had incriminating documents in relation to Bunini and Freemasonry. And there's been some debate over whether or not they proved that he was a Freemason or was somehow in cahoots with the Freemasons. In accordance with the best information that I have received, in fact, the documents incriminated Bunini as a Freemason. But the jury is still out on this. And so the documents were given to Dino Cardinal Staffa, who was the head of the Apostolica Signatura, which is the head church, the head legal court in the church. And he oversees canonical cases and stuff like that. And Silvio Cardinal Odi was also involved in this. The documents were given to the Roman police, the Italian police, the Carabinieri, who actually have a section where they deal with this sort of stuff. And the documents were brought to the police. The police authenticated the documents, basically, and said they look authentic to us. And then between Staffa and Odi, the information was brought to Pope St. Paul VI. And shortly thereafter, Bonini became the papal nuncio to Iran, despite the fact that he had no career or experience in the papal diplomatic corps. So that raised a lot of heads. Why did the Pope do that? Why? And this was so very sudden in about 75, 76, roughly in that time frame. Bonini lived out the rest of his days. I think he died in 82, I think. He swore left, right, and 6 ways from Monday that he was not a Freemason. And he even threatened a lawsuit, because there was one traditionalist in particular named Michael Davies, who was very, very well known in traditionalist Catholic circles. He was the president of the Una Voce International, I think was the name of the organization. And he actually corresponded with the priest who found the briefcase, if I remember my facts correctly. And Bonini was swearing at the same time that he was not a Freemason, and he threatened to sue Michael Davies, who passed away in 2004, I want to add. Well, Bonini died, of course, long before Davies did. But recently, I was able to bring out to light more information about this famous briefcase story, because I mentioned earlier Father Brian Harrison. He knew Michael Davies, and Michael Davies was at a party, I think in New Jersey, I want to say. And Michael Davies had let slip the name of the cardinal during the party, and in Father Brian's presence, the name of the cardinal, Dino Staffa, who had brought the documents to Rome, to the Pope. And somebody else who was in the room got upset with Michael Davies and said to him, like, you weren't supposed to say that. That's like uber secret, So I don't know who this other person is. They were still living as of 2019, and Father Harrison has not seen fit to clarify yet who that was. But he did clarify that the founding president of Una Voce International, Dr. Erich von Saventem, who was a German, I think he was an aristocrat. He was high German culture. He also knew the priest who found the briefcase, and Saventem was also, talked about it with some people, including Michael Davies, who became the successor of Saventem in Una Voce International. So this is all of the general background, the lead up, and of course now we have we have Charles Murr's book, Murder in the 33rd Degree, in which he's very, very keen to point out some of these things, as well as his book, The Godmother, because he lived in Rome and knew some of these people, including the apostolic visitator to the Roman Curia, later Cardinal Gagnon, then I think Bishop or Archbishop Gagnon. So Father Murr knew about all of this stuff too, but he kept quiet for many years because he was doing pastoral work in Mexico for a little while, and then pastoral work in the Archdiocese of New York. And then he lived in San Francisco for a little while. Now he lives, he recently relocated to Europe. So, and he gives interviews there. So that's a large background. I hope that was very helpful. But now, with respect to the rest of the question, how do you think Archbishop Bonini's membership in the Freemasons affected his decisions in the Roman Curia? Well, if he was a bad actor, then he wouldn't be The question is, to whom are you loyal? Are you loyal to the faith? And have you inculcated that the attitude that was expressed in Latin, centere cum ecclesia, to think with the church? Or are you thinking in line with Masonic ideals? And there's a very famous story involving one of the fathers of the concilium, or the consultants of the concilium, Father Louis Bouillet, who ran into Bonini one day when Bouillet was coming out of the papal apartments off the elevator. And he basically, to summarize what he said, Bonini, he ran into Bonini, and when he saw where he had just come from, Bonini's face just turned to ash, like ashen, because he realized, something wasn't quite right. Because according to another story, Bouillet had said that members of the concilium were starting to get they were scratching their heads at some of the stuff that was coming from the Pope. But remember, Bonini was the key figure. He was on making sure the trains were running correctly, right? We're supposed to make sure they were doing that. Well, what happened was they would talk about A, Bonini received A, and it is said that when he went to talk to Paul VI about A, he said B. And when the Pope heard B and not A, he said C, and it basically just miscommunications out, like all that kind of stuff. But the question was it malicious? Did Bonini deliberately miscommunicate in order to muddle things up? That's one of the open historical questions that people are asking at this time, and have been asking for many years now. So those are all of the things floating in the background. But I think that if Bonini was inspired by Freemasonic ideals, and I do mean if he was inspired, I don't think that those would have carried over very well in thinking of an orthodox manner and an orthopraxy with respect to what being faithful what the Council Fathers wanted with the reforms of the liturgy, Roman liturgy, and implementing those. Now, a lot of emphasis gets put on this, and I'm actually in the process of organizing a roundtable discussion. And I've got a couple of people that have offered to do this over on Reason and Theology, with Michael Lofton. We're looking to put together a roundtable that discusses this, because sooner or later the news is going to break. It's going to become an established fact about the briefcase. It just is. The evidence is going in that direction. Too many people are talking before they die, and it's going in this direction. And so we want to have a roundtable discussion that basically prepares people for this and asks some of the in-depth theological questions and tackles the challenges that it poses. So, for instance, if we didn't get the liturgy that the Council Fathers wanted, how could this have happened? What about papal infallibility, right? So people have questions, and this is stuff that we want to talk, that we want to tackle. Also, indefectibility of the church. What does this say for the indefectibility of the church? That's what we're looking to do. So that when the news really breaks officially, sooner or later, that we have this to refer back to help people at that time. And lastly, the Cardinal Stickler's assertion. I had heard of this. I think it was in a magazine. I think it was the Latin Mass magazine. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Jeremy. But Stickler had said that it was something worse than Freemasonry. Well, there's a couple ways you could look at it. Was it his betrayal of the church? That was the worst thing? Or if he was a Freemason, was it the betrayal of the Pope and all of that? Or was it the Freemasonry thing? Cardinal Stickler said that Bonini was dismissed for something worse than Freemasonry. If his eminence was still alive, I'd probably look at him and say, so something like betraying the Pope, the trust and confidence of the Pope, would that be worse? And establishing all of this stuff with the liturgy. So yeah, these are things that are kind of behind all of this. And let me be very clear, though. It doesn't take away from these questions don't take away from the validity of the Novus Ordo Missae, the Mass of Paul VI, as they say. I attend it actually myself here in my area. The extraordinary form is offered very little in my diocese after the publication, especially of Traditionis Custodes, and uh, I primarily go because gas is expensive right now anyway. But I primarily go and attend the Novus Ordo Missae. Um, yeah, and there are some banal liturgies that you can attend, and I'm not saying here in my parish. I'm speaking broadly now. Just there are some people who have very weird ideas, like saying mass on a raft in the middle of the water. That's a pretty bad thing to do. Uh, but yeah, so I don't agree with all of those things, and everybody would rightly condemn those as errors. But pitting it on Vatican II, um, the jury's still out, and people are asking these questions. So, um, yeah, I hope that was a very in depth answer to that question. I hope it was helpful for people.
All right. Um, I think people are enjoying these in-depth responses. So, uh,
Well, I have no trouble in addressing. A lot of the pastors of the church nowadays, they don't want to get into the controversial stuff.
mm,
But I think that's part of what the problem we're facing is comprised of. The pastors of the church are not directly heading these things on. They are not boldly getting up there with crozier and mitre and condemning errors and I mean, like, think of, like, for instance, with something like with like Nancy Pelosi. Imagine if her Archbishop Cordileone went to the cathedral dressed up and, like, basically a scene straight out of the movie Beckett. Had the 100% beeswax candles and and delivered that beautiful line that Richard Burton did in the movie. Uh, Nancy Pelosi, representative and Speaker of the House. While at liberty in the land. We declare her excommunicate and anathema, and then turns the candle and smashes it on the ground. I mean, the visuals of it. I admit, I would cry. I would cry because not because of the terrible thing that excommunication is, not because I want to see something like this happen, but because the faith is defended.
mm,
And that's what I think a lot of people are looking for now. They are looking to see the faith defended. They don't want to see political figures as pastors. They want to see true shepherds who have a proper, healthy fear of God. Of course, fear of God here is love, and fearing you don't want to offend the one that you love. That's what a healthy love of God is all about. And so I think it's important for us to tackle these issues and not be afraid of them.
mm,
And so I have no trouble being very direct about something. As a matter of fact, when I debated Christopher Ferrara about Fatima 5 years ago, this coming October, I had somebody come up to me during the course of that weekend, and they said to me, I just really wanted to thank you, Kevin, because unlike another person who had at that point recently debated Christopher Ferrara, I won't say the name, but somebody else had debated Ferrara. You actually, basically, this person said to me, took the bull by the horns and you directly addressed the issues. You didn't skirt them. And I said, well, yeah, let's not be afraid to talk about it. They say that we weren't supposed to talk about religion and politics, and I think that's a big problem. We should be taught how to hold civil conversations about controversial subjects. It's
mm,
all part of being a good citizen,
right.
and as well as a faithful member of the church. And especially with respect to the church, pardon me, we always have to maintain the law of charity. And Augustine pointed this out, and I can't remember which letter it was, but in one of his letters, he talked about the law of charity in some of these discussions and useless debates and stuff. But we need to be bold and talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
charitably, of course, and with reasoned ideas.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, okay. Our next question here comes from Dragonite. He says, "Howdy, Kevin. Since you specialize in Marian apparitions, are there known Marian apparitions to non-Catholics that you are aware of?"
I think Our Lady had appeared, or our Lord had appeared to some people over time. Again, I couldn't recall specific examples, but I think these folks ended up converting uh, at one point. Uh, I know, for instance, there's a very famous hymn in a hymn to Our Lady in the Eastern churches, and it's what is it called?
Are you talking Agni Parthene? Or
Yes,
okay.
yeah, and it's very beautiful, the Agni Parthene, and that was Our Lady had taught that to a I think Greek Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox monk. They just made a movie about him, actually, and I
Oh,
really,
yep,
I really
yep.
do want to see it. But the Serbian singer Divna Ljubojevic and her group Melody has a beautiful rendition of it. It's I think it's an abbreviated one because I think there was one part that was left out. But it's like Agni Parthene despina acrante Theotokè. And then there's a choir that chimes in that. It's very, very beautiful. Pardon how horrible and froggy my voice sounds right now. Um, but it's beautiful. I encourage people to look up Divna Ljubojevic and Melody on YouTube. They just get some beautiful stuff. Um, of course, this is an Eastern Orthodox monk or a priest. It's not Catholic. So that would be an example of if it is an authentic apparition. And I don't know enough about the case to make a judgment on it, but I'll tell you, with that kind of a beautiful prayer, you got to wonder. But you have to wonder about people questioning its authenticity. Um, Our Lady can certainly appear to people who are non-Catholic, um, if God so chooses. And in this case, I wouldn't be surprised if she did, and we got that beautiful hymn, the Agni Parthene, as a result. Um, Another beautiful one is the Axion Estin, which is the Greek. There's also a Slavonic Dostojno Jest version of it as well. They're just beautiful. Look up Divna Ljubojevic. Good stuff.
Uh, Hello there says, "Hello there. Me, my mom, and my little sister visited an eyeglass shop near my town where I went to change my glasses because my eyeglass left hinge, which made the glass left temple fall if I didn't tape it. And inside the glasses shop has quite a number of posters of Our Lady of All Nations and a little booklet explaining the devotions and how it is approved by the Catholic Church, and an additional free paper of praying the rosary in my native language, Tagalog. And I took 3 posters and booklets from the shop. Is this apparition of Our Lady of All Nations good? What should Catholics do about it? I heard that it's not allowed to be propagated, but a Catholic can personally do a devotion of it."
Okay. Well, hello there. It's an interesting name when you're saying hello there. It's like hello there. Well, you're talking to the person, or you're saying the greeting. um, to your questions, I will directly answer the questions, and then we'll back up and we'll walk through them. The first question is this apparition of Our Lady of All Nations good? The short answer, no. What should Catholics do about it? Avoid it like the plague. I heard that it's not allowed to be propagated, but a Catholic can personally do a devotion of it. I don't think that's how the church views it at that time. Uh, and then the last one, and for you, what Marian apparition is overrated and which Marian apparition is underrated? I have to really sit and think about that last one. So let me address the Our Lady of All Nations thing first, and then we'll talk about the last one. So, hello there. You ask good questions about Our Lady of All Nations. So these were a series of alleged revelations given to a woman named Ida Peerdeman, in the Netherlands, I think between the 40s, I think in the 50s. And there was some controversy over it. It wasn't originally approved, but or there were investigations into it. But then in the 1970s, the Holy See issued a notification on the subject in which it had basically said that this is not supernatural or or it cannot be proven to be supernatural. Now that's a decree from that is a notification from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Well, what happened was 30 or so years later, oh, by the way, that notification is available on the Vatican's website. And I have a picture of it because the document was published in the English edition of, the Vatican's newspaper, L'Osservatore Romano. And I have a copy of that picture somewhere in my private files. But now it's available online. And in 2002, the then Bishop of Amsterdam, I think it was Amsterdam, Joseph Marialis Punt, who had been consecrated, as I understand it, to Our Lady of All Nations by his mother when he was a child, he approved it, quote unquote. Well, the problem with that is the local bishop doesn't trump Rome. And there was nothing in his decree that said Rome reversed its notification. Fast forward about 6 years, then Monsignor, now Archbishop, Charles Scicluna, delivered a paper at a Mariology meeting in Lourdes back in 2008, in which he talked about the Vatican's norms for discerning alleged revelations that had been published in 1978. Well, what he did was he put a footnote. He relegated this to a footnote, but he basically raised the point that I'm severely truncating what he said, but he said basically Punt didn't have the authority to do that. And as of then, 2008, no one from the Holy See has said anything against Punt's decree. Well, that was the status of things until I think 2020, I think around the summer of 2020, when it became known that the Holy See has in fact now issued a thing that effectively reverses this or overrules the local bishop and says, no, you don't have that competency. We never reneged this notification. There was no discussion, whatever. I don't remember all of the details, but the point being that the 1974 notification from the Holy See still stood. So, and I remember many years ago watching an episode of EWTN News with Raymond Arroyo. It was somewhere between 1996 and 2005 that I watched this episode. And Raymond Arroyo was talking about this very point of the Our Lady of All Nations. So Raymond Arroyo was talking about this, and oh wow, I'm just seeing a meme here in the live chat. It looks like they photoshopped a picture of an African American guy with a Taylor Marshall picture. That's really good Photoshop. So anyway, and he talked about how Ida Peerdeman, Raymond Arroyo that is, commented that Ida Peerdeman had said that it was going to be prophesied that it was going to be John Paul II that would proclaim the fifth Marian dogma of Mary's mediation, her co-redemption title there. Well, of course, John Paul dies in April of 2005, never having done that. So I remember I was talking. Raymond Arroyo had in 2005, I think, had published his biography of Mother Angelica, and he was in December of 2005. He was at Franciscan University, and I was in my last year of my master's studies at the time. And long story short, I was able to go out and have dinner with him at the local Eaton Park in the Weirton, West Virginia area. And I asked him about this story because it had been a few years by that point. And I asked him, I said, did you, I said, am I remembering this correctly there, Raymond? Or am I misremembering? Like, what did you in fact say this on the live show about what Edith Peardeman said? And he said to me, he says, yeah, that sounds about right. That sounds like something that I think I said. So I was like, okay, good. And he said it in the presence of 4 witnesses. So I was happy. I don't know if anybody would remember it now, but I certainly remember because it was important to me, of course. Uh, so now you have this false prophecy from Ida Peardeman that also now factors into these things, at least as I see it and understand it. Um, so yeah, I really discourage people against Our Lady of All Nations. I mean, my friend, may he rest in peace, Rick Salbato had some good stuff over on his website, unitypublishing.com, that talked about he had some criticisms about these alleged apparitions. I encourage people to go take a look at those. There was some very weird oddities that took place in all of that. Among them being that line in the prayer, "May the Blessed Virgin, may the Blessed Virgin who once was Mary," or something like that. What? Even the Holy See said, no, you can't do that. You have to stop saying that. So even the Holy See directly intervened on that. Uh, so if people, I would recommend that people read the recent information on it, inform themselves on this particular on Nations case. Michael O'Neill, the Miracle Hunter, I think probably has the most recent information on it. If he has a radio show on EWTN, he also has that TV show They Might Be Saints, also with EWTN, I believe. And he does good work, and I do know him personally. So I'm not trying to give a personal plug for anybody, but he does do good work in this area, and I believe he has probably likely the most up-to-date information on that. Uh, Now, what Marian apparition is overrated and which Marian apparition is underrated, I really don't know. A lot of people, there's a debate over which particular apparition is bigger, Lourdes or Fatima. uh, that's kind of it's a playful thing on the devotees, though. It's more, it's not really a real serious thing. Um, but I think sometimes the La Salette one, maybe we could argue, is a bit overrated, only because people don't really know what was said and what the real facts are of Our Lady of La Salette. A lot of it remains inaccessible to us because it's written in the French language. So unless you speak French, it's a little harder for us in the English-speaking world to be familiar with the sources, especially from the La Salette father. I think it's Jean Stern. He has a whole 3-volume series on La Salette that, as I understand it, is pretty foundational in La Salette studies. Um, so I would say La Salette, because I would say, my private opinion, La Salette is probably the one that's overrated, but based upon how people don't really have all of the facts, and instead they go talking about how, like, the alleged statement that Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of Antichrist. It's like, well, that could apply to the loss of the Papal States in 1870, and the enthronement of the King of Italy as head of Italy in Rome. It could refer to that. Just saying. And then which at Marian apparition is underrated? I'd have to really sit and think about that one. Uh, I really don't know which one would be underrated. I have to do some thinking on that. So if you'd like, please feel free to message me a little bit later, and maybe we can catch up on that. Hello there.
Our next one comes from Gaius Augustus Lapis Major, and he says, "Do you have any pets?"
Not at present. I'm thinking of getting a cat, though. I grew up with many cats, and we also had a greyhound from '93 to '96. His name was Odyssey, by the way. Uh, so I like cats. I like dogs, uh, but I don't have any at present. Though I am thinking of getting a cat. They're just so nice and cuddly
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
when they're not scratching your eyeballs out.
Right. Um, from our buddy Church Emeritus. Hi, Kevin. My name is Kevin. Are apparitions which are approved by the Holy See considered infallible or a high degree of certainty? I would imagine that apparitions are not dogmatically defined like council.
No, the church does not enjoy the charism of infallibility with respect to alleged private revelations, even approved ones. I talked about this in my book, Refractions of Light, actually. It's in one of the questions and answers. And the reason is because these are the church view in her theology and practice views this subject under pious devotions or pious traditions. And these are highly, highly debatable matters. They do not pertain themselves to the deposit of faith. Now, if an alleged vision is making dogmatic statements, those do have to be looked at, of course. But an apparition itself is not a matter for the deposit of faith. And so there are those theologians who argue, myself included, although I'm not a licensed theologian. In other words, I don't have my licentiate degree. Um, there are those of us who do believe that it is not part of the charism of infallibility. So the church can endorse something, like the local bishop can say, yeah, this is great. And then it turned out to have been a complete fraud. It can also happen the other way. The church could say, yeah, this ain't good. And then all of a sudden, oops, wait a minute, we had bad information. And next thing, that's how the Divine Mercy devotion became propagated, actually, and well known. The story goes was that there were some bad translations of Sister Faustina Kowalska's diary that got to Rome, and some of these decisions were based upon to put, because her diary was put on the Index of Forbidden Books under the pontificate of John the 23rd. Uh, Interestingly, if any of you have seen the movie The Scarlet and the Black or read the book, it was Monsignore Hugo O'Flaherty, the guy that was helping hide all those people in Rome. He was the one that signed off on the decree putting Sister Kowalska, now Saint Faustina Kowalska's diary, on the Index of Forbidden Books. But of course, that was all later reversed under Karol Wojtyła, first as the Cardinal Archbishop of Krakow, and then as John Paul II. So no, they don't enjoy the charism of infallibility. So even if it comes from the Holy See directly, no.
Our next
How many,
question.
how many foreign names does this man have memorized?
All of them. He has them all memorized, guys. Um, from Riley Tea Drinker. Hello, thanks for answering our questions. How do you like your burgers?
Well done. I know. There was a great wailing and gnashing of teeth. I know, but I'm a well done burger guy.
Yeah, that's gonna make a few people upset.
People like the juicy. They want the blood running down their mouth, and I'm just like, okay, a good juicy one. Okay, yeah, those are good, but I do enjoy mine well done. I admit I'm a heathen. Treat me as a tax heathen and a tax collector.
Righty. So our next question here comes from Capitalism. Do you believe the validity of the apparitions at Garabandal, and do you think that the promises made will happen soon? Same question for Our Lady of Akita.
Okay, so there's two parts to the Garabandal and the Akita question. Do I believe in the validity of the apparition of Garabandal? No. And do I believe that the promises made will happen soon? No. I do not believe in the authenticity of Garabandal. And one of the shortest things that I could point to that is there was a very famous and well-known prophecy involving a blind man named Joey Lamangino, and it was said that he would live to see the prophesied miracle. Well, he died several years ago before the warning and the miracle took place. And he was also supposed to have received his eyesight back, part of a miraculous healing. Well, if that is truly connected to the actual prophecies of the alleged apparition at Garabandal, his death, without these things coming to fulfillment, is basically, that's all you really need. It's false prophecies didn't come true. Now, prior to the Lamangino's death, the local bishops there in Santander had San Sebastian de Garabandal is the name of the local area, but it's the Bishop of Santander, I think it's the diocese of. There were a number of statements from the local ordinaries in which they all said the same thing: the supernatural is not established. See, the church looks at these things in a trajectory, and there are three categories that reflect this trajectory. The church is asking the question, is this supernatural? Does this come from God? And she has three traditional Latin expressions. The first is constata supernaturalitate, which means basically, yes, it consists of the supernatural. Then there's a second one, non constata supernaturalitate. This one's a little more misunderstood, but to keep it simple, it basically translates as the supernatural is not established, meaning there's still some room for a little bit of debate. We are open to, but it's still a negative. And then the third one is constata non supernaturalitate, meaning it is not supernatural. So it's a definitive. We've looked at things. It is not supernatural. End of story. So there's one positive, the constata de supernaturalitate, and then there are two subheadings in the negative category, the non-constat and constat non. And the local bishops there have consistently said that the supernatural is not established, unless there's been more recent developments with which I'm not familiar. But yes, I don't believe in Garabandal. A good friend of mine, Father Edward Looney, from the priest of the Diocese of Green Bay, he has openly come out in favor of it, and he and I, we actually just met in Chicago last week. We were filming for The Unexplained with William Shatner, so we were able to meet at a little open area cafe next to the house where we were filming. But we didn't get to talk about the subject. But sooner or later, he and I are going to have this conversation. So, Father, if you're listening, stay tuned. We're gonna talk about that at some point in time. Wouldn't you love to be a fly on the wall for that conversation? All right, and then the ones of Our Lady of Akita in Japan. This was a famous apparition, alleged apparition, to a nun named Sister Agnes Sasagawa in Akita, Japan, or in that general area. And there were very famous prophecies attached to this about how cardinal opposed cardinal, bishop against bishop, et cetera, all kinds of terrible things would take place. And a lot of people believe that Akita was approved by the local bishop, Bishop John Ito. But when you look at what he actually wrote, he didn't approve the alleged messages. He approved there was a lacrimating statue, a crying statue. He approved that phenomenon, saying that there is no explanation for this, no human explanation. But he did not approve the messages. And a lot of people don't have that distinction quite just yet in their minds and in their hearts. So until the diocese issues a definitive judgment on the messages, as far as I know, it is an open matter. It's an open question. So I'm open because some of them are very profound statements, but I don't really think the church is all that interested in pursuing that matter at this time. And that's what I would say to that question from capitalism. So thank you for that.
Our next question here comes from Vlad the Impaler. He says, "Hello, thanks for the AMA. My question is, what was your calling to the Catholic Church? And I thank you for being based and choosing the one true church."
Well, I think I should answer this question well, or I might end up on the wrong side of a stick. Vlad the Impaler, haha. Well, and I also am a big Castlevania fan. I love the earlier Nintendo games, and so, and then they recently came out with the animated series. Although the animated series is just it's raunchy. I can't do it. Anyway, that's not here nor there. Well, I actually, my answer to this is kind of implied when I opened up, talked a little bit about myself. I came into the church kind of under the guise of some mystical stuff. And because I always had an eye out for that kind of stuff when I was young, or younger, I should say, than I am now, being 41. Uh, and that carried over. That was kind of like the hook that God used to get me into the church. And that started in 1994, October. It all started when my father fell down a flight of stairs, our front steps, and some of his relatives, who were very devout practicing Catholics, started interacting with him and also me a little bit more. And I was very open to learning about Catholicism, and having an eye for all things mystical. My relatives were very much into this stuff, especially with like apparitions of Our Lady and Medjugorje, which I see as the next question coming up. So maybe we can segue into that from here. But Medjugorje was a big one. Like my uncle Chet, may he rest in peace. He had a little stone from Medjugorje that he told me about. It looked like it was the shape of the Blessed Mother, and the rosaries turned into gold, and all this other stuff. Uh, I look back on those days very fondly. Um, but that's kind of how I got into the church initially. Then uh, another part of my coming into the church was, and this is a whole story, this is a whole part of my life I don't really talk about publicly too much, but I was a very lonely child. I was picked on a lot as a kid and had actually contemplated suicide at least 3 times in my younger years. And when I became Catholic, the Eternal Father was very good to introduce to me his family, the church. And I was blessed with some very good and very influential people early on that made a huge difference in my life, even to this day. And they don't know it. Some of them don't even know it. But I owe my baseness, if you will, to some of the things that they helped to instill in me very early on. Uh, so, yeah, that's a whole other aspect of my conversion. Maybe later, if anybody wanted to talk a little bit more about that, I'd be happy to do that. And thank you for thinking me as being based and choosing the one true church. It's yeah. Sometimes you wonder. It's like, you're a horrible sinner. And you're like, am I really doing what I'm supposed to be doing, Lord? So, thank you for your question, and please don't impale me.
Our next one here comes from Born Aref. What do you think about Medjugorje apparitions? In your opinion, are they real, or is Satan partaking in a minuscule amount of tomfoolery?
I believe that the Medjugorje alleged apparitions are from the devil himself, right from the get-go. I strongly disagree, but respectfully disagree with the Commission of Inquiry, the International Commission of Inquiry on Medjugorje, that was established by Pope Benedict XVI. I strongly disagree with their conclusion that the first 7 apparitions are worthy of further consideration. And I was actually the guy that, though their final report had been issued in Italian by the journalist David Murgia, and I was the guy that translated it into Italian, from Italian into English, and had published it for the English-speaking world. And so when I read their conclusions, I was like, what got lost on the cutting room floor here on this one? I'm not following you guys' logic here. And my friend Marco Corvaglia, he has the website called Medjugorje Without a Mask. He does a really good job questioning the commission's conclusions. So, for instance, one of the main things that he points out is if the first 7 apparitions are authentic or worthy of further consideration, to use the formal term that was used, well, the Gospel of Medjugorje, within those first 7 apparitions, says that there were going to be further ones beyond the 7th one. So why are we sanctioning the first 7 when the first 7 expressly state that there's going to be more beyond the 7th? When Marco pointed that out, I was just like, dang, dude, that was savage, Uh, that was savage. I was like, wow, dude, that was good. That was good on you, Marco. Uh, Now, Marco, uh, he is basically a lapsed Catholic, but he's very respectful and he studies religious phenomena and stuff like that. So I hope people, because, and I say this because there's been some question about this in R&T chats before about Marco, as well as Tim Flanders' The Meaning of Catholic. I've seen some comments that people have made. They didn't like a response that I gave about all of this. But I want to be very clear. Marco is a good man. Uh, he does good work, and he's been nothing but very cooperative and very respectful over the years. Yeah, that's my general opinion on Medjugorje. I don't believe it is from God. I believe it is from the devil, even from its inception.
Uh, Alrighty. From Doug here, he says, "Hello, Kevin. What do you think is the most significant Marian apparition and why?"
Yeah, I look at this question, Doug, and I don't mean this as a criticism, but I wish you had qualified it because there have been apparitions of Our Lady throughout all of church history, but a lot of us only think of them in terms of the more recent ones from like the 1830s with the Rue de Bac and the miraculous medal revelations to present day stuff. So if we're gonna restrict it to that age of Mary, as some people have put it, beginning with the miraculous medal to the present, um, I really think that the most significant one would probably be Fatima, for reasons that I've already mentioned. It was such an explosion of the supernatural in our lives, and giving us the tools to grow deeper in love with God through the devotion to the Immaculate Heart and developing that inculcating her fiat in our lives, but also while making reparation to her for the ingratitudes and the blasphemies committed against her. So people who deny her immaculate conception or her assumption, these are hurtful things, and so we make reparation for that because we love Our Lady. Um, so I think Fatima is the most significant apparition for these and other reasons in the contemporary stuff. Now, larger church history, I'm sure we could argue and debate till the cows come home. Um, like there's the famous alleged apparition of Our Lady to St. James, which is in Zaragoza in Spain, I think. That's where
Yeah.
they have the El Camino Real, I believe.
Yeah, you're talking
That
about the apparition in, what was it, around the 40s AD?
Yeah, yeah. Um, so that would be a pretty foundational one. Our Lady would have been in around the Holy Land or in Ephesus at that point in time. So also she appears to St. James while he's preaching the gospel in Spain, and I get this church to commemorate all of that. So yeah, I mean that would be a pretty foundational one too. So we could go back and forth on that if we're going to talk about more recent stuff or larger church history. But in terms of more recent, I would say Fatima for all the reasons mentioned thus far.
Uh, and yeah, for those who are unaware, the apparition in Zaragoza is also known as Our Lady of the Pillar, where she appeared to the Apostle James in around 40 AD. I definitely recommend checking it out if you haven't. From Augustine Aquilinus, whom do you think is the most important Catholic mystic for modern Christians to know about?
Uh, you know, I love Snails' thing here, the Scooby Doo one. That's funny. Um, I I kind of go back and forth on this. We had so many powerful people in the 20th century. And more, if the question is about more recent church history, um, for modern Christians to know about. I mean, there's Saint Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross, and they're known as the doctors of the mystical doctrine of the church because they had really helped to hammer out some of these concepts for us. Um, but then insofar as like recent memory of people who were alive uh, when still living, people with us today were there. People like Irma Lucia from Fatima, Sister Lucia, Saint Padre Pio. These are some pretty powerful, influential people, um, and I would encourage people to really study their lives. Madre Mariana with Quito, Nuestra Senora de Buen Suceso. However, I'm forgetting my Spanish. I'm sorry, I'm botching it. I apologize. Um, these are all very important, very powerful people because God used them, I believe, to point to some very significant realities. And that's why I was very happy to work on that recent project with St. Paul Street Evangelization entitled Fatima and Evangelization, because it really centers around the person of Sister Lucia and her life hidden in God. And we are only now just beginning to understand what that means in relation to the message of Fatima, because Sister Lucia really lived it. Uh, and as new documentation comes out, we're going deeper and deeper and deeper. So, in understanding the depth and the profundity of Our Lady's message there. So, contemporary people, Lucia, Irma Lucia there, St. Padre Pio, uh, Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross. It's hard to say one. There's a whole cloud of witnesses, if I may borrow from the letter of the Hebrews, um, that we really look forward to. You know, uh, so yeah, I think it's the whole panoramic that's actually important, not so much one singular person, but I think it's the whole panorama of that great cloud of witnesses.
Um, from Catholic Snake. He says, "Hi, Mr. Symonds. I have encountered many people that told their stories of personally encountering God, or hear God talking to them directly to their hearts and not hearing the words. I really want to understand this phenomenon and ask if there is a way to realize if God Himself is trying to talk to me in this manner. Thank you so much."
Yes, this is actually one of the more uh, notable questions in the Church's theology of private revelation. God's revelation, the revelation of Himself, was completed at the death of the last apostle. Everything that God wanted us to know had been communicated, and that canon, if you will, that period of time, closed with the death of the last apostle, traditionally held to be Saint John the Apostle. But of course, God still exists, and the church continued on throughout time. And so God continues to speak to His people. And we generally lump this under the heading, the general theological heading of private revelation. But, and this is where we kind of get into shades of meaning, but to keep it simple, God can still, Christians are called to pray and to keep that connection with God. And so sometimes there's a general sense God has laid out for us what things that we are supposed to do, things like, for instance, the Ten Commandments, the Beatitudes, love love God, love your neighbor. These are all things we're expected to do. And sometimes God communicates through what we would call, like what we loosely call, the normal channels of His grace. If that's a very clunky expression, but it fits. It communicates the point. Then there are times, and all of us are called to seek that guidance through prayer, being informed, of course, by the teachings of the church, and to inform our consciences. Now, then there are times where there are some truly extraordinary cases where it's a moment of deep contemplation. And I mentioned Teresa of Avila earlier. This is one of the reasons why she's one of the greats. When she described contemplative prayer as like letting the masks fall and gazing at the beloved, very deeply and intensely. I know somebody that had an experience of that 21 years ago. 21, yeah, yeah. Actually, yeah. It was August 17th, 2001. I remember that. Yep. And they had been through a very intense summer, and they weren't sure what was going to happen when they went back to where they were going after that summer. And this person says that there was this very deep contemplative moment where that letting the masks fall happened, and Jesus spoke to this soul, asking, "Will you love them?" This group of people that was involved with the story. This is a larger story, but I'm just getting right to the point. Well, the person had consented, but what they didn't know was how serious the question actually was, because there was a lot of turmoil in that next year, a lot of turmoil, and loving them despite that turmoil meant, they say love is a verb, you know, you have to will it. This person definitely had to will it. It wasn't easy, if I got the story correctly. But it was that there was that deep, intense, contemplative moment that only God can initiate. We can't initiate it. We can be open, but if it doesn't happen, it's not like God is angry or upset with us or something. No, it's just God didn't will that at that time. Those experiences are very, very rare, very rare. But they do happen in the course of or that can happen in the course of one's life, in their Christian walk with God. So we don't live for those moments. We live for God. We don't live for these moments, however nice they are. But we get the touchy feel goods and all that other stuff, and we like that. But if we become addicted to the feeling as opposed to loving God, we have fallen into one of the devil's traps. So, let me just scroll up here real quick. So Catholic Snake asks, a really good question about encountering people that told the stories of personally encountering God or hear God talking to them directly to their hearts and not hearing their words. I hope I have been able to communicate some important points to this question. But it's a risk. This was a really good question. Really good question. I think it's important for us to know. So to summarize, there's the general Christian prayer that we're all called to do and have that connection with God. And sometimes, God can act that way. Then there are those contemplative moments, deep contemplation, where we let the masks fall and we're gazing upon the beloved. And sometimes God speaks. And it's unquestioned that God is speaking. Unquestioned. St. Teresa of Avila, I think, even says, you can tell if it's God speaking by certain criteria versus one's own imagination, which is another thing we have to look out for. The charismatic movement has raised a lot of questions about these sorts of issues, and this is stuff that people like myself and others are also participating in and debating and working out some of these concepts about how they all work. But we're all called to live the general Christian. We're all called to live the Christian life, and that includes prayer. And sometimes God takes us up to the heights, and other times we're crawling on the floor to pray an Our Father when we get out of bed, because we just don't feel like it. But it's that perseverance. We had the reading from the letter to the Hebrews today, I believe, in the Novus Ordo liturgy, about discipline and all that. This is what this is all about. Honoring God by our efforts, and God sees this, But those high mystical moments are very powerful, but we don't want to get addicted to them, because that turns into a kind of spiritual gluttony. And we don't want to fall into that. So I hope that helps you, Catholic Snake. And thank you again for this question. It's a really good one.
From and man, I've never known how to say your name, and I don't. But Wizarf1, I think.
Wizard
Uh,
phone.
yeah, I don't know. It's that capitalized O that makes it weird. He says, "Hey, good sire, thank you so much for doing this. Very deep question. Do you prefer waffles or pancakes?"
Pancakes.
Nice. Next question. What are you doing? Asks, from what I remember, Marian apparitions always appear as similar to the culture she appears in. Are there any exceptions to this? Uh, Also, how long did it take for Our Lady of Guadalupe to be accepted by most of the people of New Spain?
Our Lady can appear similar to the culture in which she appears. Other times, she may appear with certain symbolism in order to speak that speaks to the message that she wishes to communicate. So, for instance, at Fatima, Our Lady appears in a certain way that doesn't strike anybody as being particularly Portuguese. I've never, in any of my studies, ever read anybody talk about this. Actually, now that I'm really sitting and think about it, I don't recall coming across this. Um, and maybe there is, and I just haven't seen it. And I accept that. Other times she does appear. So, for instance, like Guadalupe, um, Our Lady and the Tilma. Well, I'm going to put a plug in. There's a couple out in California who are working on a very, very powerful book about Our Lady of Guadalupe. They have done some impressive original research, and I have had the utmost pleasure to be one of the editors for this book. And they are going to bring out some really good observations that show how the supernatural uses the natural in order to communicate the gospel and to effectively point out that it is God, first and foremost, who does the evangelization. We are his tools, but it really comes down to God. So, for instance, the Franciscans were failing at trying to evangelize the natives, the Mexica. Some people say the Aztecs, but that was part of it, but also the Mexica. And they thought they were going to have to pack up and go back to Spain. There was actually a text from the Bishop Zumarraga, who talked about this. I think there's a letter from him that indicates this. They were fearing they'd have to go pack up and go back home. Because if I may use a common expression, they were getting their butts whooped. So, what the thesis of this book goes into this very sort of issue. And are you guys all familiar with the expression "hold my beer"? Let me click over the live chat so I can see this. Well, we see the responses to this. But if you guys are familiar with that expression, "hold my beer," when we have our weekly editing meetings, for the book, when they were explaining and I was reading the chapters, I looked at the couple and I said to them on Zoom, I said, "Are you basically arguing that what happened here was Our Lady's hold my beer moment?" And they were like, they're so good people. They're so innocent. They're like, "Well, what does that mean?" So I had to explain the concept. And they were like, "Well, yeah, it kind of sounds like that. It's Our Lady's hold my." The Franciscans and the bishop, they were not doing so well, and basically this was Our Lady's hold my beer. Let me show you how it's done moment. And boom, Guadalupe happened. And I wish they could rename that. I would die laughing if they published that book as "Hold My Beer: Our Lady of Guadalupe Story." um, so, yeah. Let me just go back to the questions here. Yeah. So Guadalupe, the image on the tilma is one part of that story. And a lot of people focus on the tilma because it's a very tangible object, right? And people can latch on to that. But there's a much broader story. I can't wait for this book to come out, and I'm giving them all kinds of free press right now. So I'll just back it up and say it's a good book. Wait till it comes out. It's going to be good. But the image on the tilma does reflect it's a harmony of both worlds, and the natives understood that. But it wasn't so much about the tilma. The tilma didn't cause all of those conversions, and this bridges into the second part of "What are you doing's" question. It wasn't also the tilma. Our Lady took advantage of cultural things that had existed for centuries that would have been understood in that cultural context. And the book that I'm talking about goes into all of this. And it's got some great. I've met that illustrator too. She has done some excellent work illustrating this in the style of Central American art. It just blows my mind just thinking about it. I mean, I get goosebumps talking about it. And so it was a blending of both worlds. And Saint Juan Diego was he was born pre Spanish conquest in the 1400s. So he saw the old. He was there with the new. And it was a beautiful harmony, the old and the new. And that is what in part led to so many conversions, 9 to 10 million people, it is roughly estimated. And it happened within the first 10 years. The story eventually spread, and people were relating to it because it spoke to their culture, which was the missing element. But it took Our Lady's hold my beer moment for people to finally get it. And I just get the book when it comes out. I'll be advertising it out the wazoo when it comes ready. So I think that answer. I think hopefully that addresses your question. What are you doing?
From Electrical Cord, King of Plugs. He says, "Hello, Mr. Symonds. It's an honor for you to be within this humble server of ours. What are your thoughts on people who claim Marian apparitions are due to lies, hypnosis, etc.? In what ways have you seen, and what examples can you give of proof of these apparitions are real?"
Let me just find the question here so I can see it right in front of me. Lots of people are due to lies, hypnosis, etc. Well, it's going to depend upon the person that makes the claim. There are those that will just never believe. They think they don't believe in God. They're atheists, or they just don't believe in it. Or there may be deists who believe that God has just set it all up and then just walked away. It just depends, and you have to kind of go accordingly. But something like Fatima, you can't argue, for instance, the miracle of the sun and the drying of people's clothes. You can't chalk that up to a lie and hypnosis or mass hallucination. You can't do that because these are tangible things, especially the clothes in the ground being dry after the miracle of the sun. It had been downpouring beforehand. So if somebody's going to sit there and say it's a lie, how do you explain it? You had 70,000 people all attesting to the singular fact. Yeah, our clothes were all dry. I have never seen anybody contest that fact of the miracle. Even those that didn't see the sun dance, and there are some records that talk about that from witnesses or people who were there. But none of them have ever said the clothes weren't dry, the ground wasn't dry. No one has ever. So how do you explain that? It's a lot harder to prove that one. Now, that's the Phantom story. Now, other ones, Lourdes. How do we explain the healings at Lourdes, for instance? Well, Lourdes has a whole medical board. They investigate these claims, and they've only ever endorsed a handful of them as saying that this is truly a miraculous. They grill people. The church has very rigorous processes by which she goes through to do all of this stuff, and she always has. Tweaked, of course, over the years and the centuries, but to fine tune and make it better. But when you have all right, in more recent times, for instance, and this is Electrical Cord, King of Plugs. There was a case of an exorcism that took place in Indiana, and that one of the children involved in the story walked up the wall in a hospital, I believe, or the home, one of the two, the home where all this took place. It was either the home or the hospital, but I want to say it was the hospital. Well, that's a pretty powerful claim. The kid walked up the wall, right? Now, if I said that, if I turned around and said, yeah, I saw it myself, or if the mother said it, we would be like, okay, well, who are you, right? But doctors, nurses, and a cop, a police officer, witnessed this, and they all swore on camera the boy walked up the wall, like defying gravity, like from Wicked, defying gravity, Uh, sorry, you're getting a bit of a musical tonight too. Um, so a lot of it is predicated upon the witnesses and their credibility. St. Augustine actually talks about some of these issues in his De Civitate Dei on the City of God in one of the later books. I can't remember the precise citation off the top of my head. But he talks about, for instance, why do we not know about a miracle that takes place until after the fact or whatever? Or even like when I was teaching, this is a true story. Um, when I was teaching in Texas, we got to talking about the subject of the Bible and the healings of Jesus in my senior level class, and one of my students looked at me and said, "Well, Mr. Symonds, like if that's nice that all these things happened then, but like what about now?" And in the city where I was in teaching in, there actually was a healing of a man from cancer, malignant cancer. And I looked right at the student in front of the whole class, and I said, "Well, you don't have to look any further than right here in our town." And everybody was like, "What?" And I said, "There was a man cured of cancer here in our town." And they were like, "Are you serious, Mr. Symonds?" I said, "Yes." And they're like, "Well, how do you know?" And I said, "Because I know the family. I'm friends with them." And they were like, "Well, why wasn't this in the papers or something?" And I said, "Because the family doesn't want to, have the news cameras. They don't want all that curiosity seeking. They don't want all of the negative publicity that would disrupt their lives." But the guy in question went into the doctor in April, I think it was, and got the diagnosis. 2 months later, he went back, and all he was taking was his blood pressure medication. His family prayed the rosary for him, and the doctor came in X-rays and was like visibly shaken and said, "I can't explain this, but your cancer is gone. You don't even have scar tissue. You don't even have scar tissue on your lungs." And so things do happen. They do happen, uh, in this day and age. But so you have a doctor holding the X-ray or the MRI, whatever it was. He had it in his hand. He had the before and after, you know, and it was the same guy. And all he took was blood pressure medication. How do you explain that? And St. Augustine in De Civitate Dei talks about this in terms of, well, usually it's the authority of the church that says that this is legitimate. So there were healings that had happened in Hippo. He details a lot of them actually in De Civitate Dei. Um, and he has some beautiful discussions on this. So I would encourage you to, if you are engaging with people on this, feel them out, feel where they are. First of all, can you have a conversation with this person? Or are they just so dead set, no, can't ever happen, nothing will ever convince me otherwise? Well, then, you're polite and you're respectful and you move on. But if you can have an honest conversation with this person, just try to talk about some of the tenets of it, about authority, medical witness, the testimony of other people, for instance, the police officer who saw the boy walking up the wall there, um, and then just ask, how can these people be lying? They all saw the same thing, and they're all saying, these are people who have everything to lose, their professional careers, doctors, nurses, police officer. They don't want to be. Why would they sit there and claim that, knowing that they'd be laughing stocks in their community, possibly lose their jobs if they're lying? Why would they do that? Try to be reasonable about it. Whether or not they accept it as an authentic miracle, your job is to tell the message, not to convince them. You can help their understanding, bringing them maybe to convincing. Hopefully, we pray, but ultimately, that's going to be a work of God in their heart. But be ready, be prepared with the facts, and uh, engage in conversational evangelization, really, in direct and relational evangelization. So those would be some of my thoughts on all of that. Good question.
Nice. Um, Captain Nemo asks here, hello, Kevin. First of all, how are you today? Second of all, when I talk to my Protestant friend about Catholic faith, their biggest worry is Marian veneration, and they compare Marian and saint intercession to necromancy. Do you have any tips on how to tackle that? And I believe he made a slight addendum in the live chat. They compare it to necromancy and or idolatry.
Okay. Um. Well, I actually have a funny way to. I actually do. I do have. I have developed a way to address this point. Um. First, I'm a little under the weather, but I've been kind of invigorated by this talk. So I'm already feeling a little better. Still a little stuffy. You can probably hear it in my voice. Sound a little froggy. Um, Marian veneration. They compare Marian and saint intercession to necromancy. How do you have tips on how to tackle that? Yes. I usually start, not in this context, but just talking about the communion of saints in general. When I'm talking with somebody who doesn't believe in this doctrine of our faith, I look at them and I say, uh, if everybody has a common understanding of what baptism is, let's say, that if that's already established, and I look at them and I'd say, okay, does baptism incorporate you as a member within the mystical body of Christ? Well, of course, they have to say yes. I said, okay. So does death kick you out of the mystical body of Christ? That's a tough one for those who haven't really thought it through. And the only honest answer is no. Because if you're kicked out of the mystical body in death, how does that lead unto salvation? If being a mystical member of the body of Christ is necessary for salvation, if you're kicked out at death, you don't have a hope of you don't have a hope, So, and I say, okay, so if baptism incorporates you into the mystical body of Christ, and death does not sever that link, you enter maybe like a new state. You're no longer in the church militant. You either go to the church suffering or the church triumphant, or worst case scenario, you can go to a certain fiery place of eternal doom, perhaps. But in which case, then you are kicked out. But if you go to the church suffering, aka purgatory, the church militant, you are still, the church triumphant in heaven, you are still a member of the mystical body of Christ. You have that indelible seal on your soul, which you still have that indelible mark on your soul, even if you're in hell. But so I say, okay, so if all of that is true, how can there not be communication within the body of Christ? And that's a question that people are often left to ponder, because that overrides the question of necromancy. First of all, necromancy is like you're summoning the dead, or that kind of stuff with what's the name of that book in the Evil Dead, the Necronomicon Necronomicon or something. I can't remember the name of that book.
The Necronomicon.
Thank you. So that's that kind of stuff, but that's not what we're talking about here. That is not what we are talking about. This is about the communion of saints within the mystical body of Christ. And that still takes place. And so within that understanding, we can go to our friends in high places, the saints in heaven. But people have to that's been my approach over the years. If I'm asked if I have any tips on that, that's what I would say. That's the approach that I would offer. Now, if you use it, I want a nickel every time you do it, and send my no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, that's how I typically approach that subject, is by making people think a little more critically about some of these issues. Depending upon what questions are still up and coming, I have another story that definitely gets people thinking about critical thinking skills in relation to Marian issues. So,
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answer was helpful for you, Captain Nemo.
From Potato Infallibility. Hello, Mr. Symonds. It is I, Potato Infallibility. I have one question. Who is your favorite saint and why? Mine is Pope John Paul II.
Saint Benedict, and this goes into my conversion story. Back in 1997, I was introduced to the person of Saint Benedict through my godmother, and and later, a few months later, I got a hold of like the Saint Benedict medal, the crucifix, and the Tan Books edition of his life by Pope Saint Gregory the Great and his dialogues. I just fell in love with Benedict. I was like, this is the next coolest thing next to sliced bread. Fighting the demon stories and all this cool stuff. And then I was on a 2-week summer program up in New Hampshire, and the chaplain for that program was a Benedictine monk, and he was a very inspiring man. He had a very deep and proper voice, and when he would talk, he just kept you enthralled. When he was, especially the way he celebrated the liturgy, it was beautiful, just gorgeous. And I mentioned earlier some of those formative experiences that I had early on. That was one of them. So Benedict was very much at the root of all of that. And little known fact, I actually had tried my hand, tried my vocation, as it were, at one point as a Benedictine monk. In another life, I was Brother Gregory. I had just turned out, obviously, but yeah, that's the answer to that one. Saint Benedict.
Oh, he is a good saint. I highly recommend him to anyone who hasn't studied up on him. Um, our next question here comes from Philcath Minecrafter. Hello, Mr. Symonds. What are your thoughts about the apparitions of Mary, Mediatrix of All Grace in Lipa City, Batangas, Philippines? Its status in the local church is somewhat odd, since devotion to the image and title is still permitted, yet the apparitions and messages were condemned as non-supernatural by the church back in 51. But supporters have been claiming that there were no documents that have been sent back to the Vatican during the original investigation in the 50s, and that most, if not all, of the signatory bishops of the condemnation supposedly recanted their decision in their deathbed. Although, as far as I know, they haven't given substantial evidence to prove this. I personally have read the messages of the apparition, and I found one message in particular regarding China's dream to conquer the whole world, starting with the Philippines, to be chillingly prophetic, especially when viewed in the light of the recent disputes between our countries. My question is, would it be possible for a non-supernatural ruling to be reversed, or is there no hope for recognition for the apparitions? Thank you, and may God bless you.
Yes, we actually addressed this earlier. It is possible for a non-supernatural, the constant in non, or the non-constant to supernaturalitate things to be reversed. I am somewhat familiar with what's going on in Lipa City there with Mary Mediatrix of All Grace. Rome, however, I default on the side of Rome on this. And I have very specific reasons, which I have to admit I'm not all that comfortable stating publicly, but because it would be very badly received by certain persons, but not in this chat, but just in general. But Rome has said, because I think it was the Archbishop Arguelles, I think, who allegedly approved them, but Rome intervened and said, no, we had spoken on this during the reign of Pius XII, but there's a question over the document. It hasn't really been produced. So I don't know all of the ins and outs of this particular case. I know that there are some diehard devotees of it in the Philippines, and I've gotten emails about this, and they are they are really up in arms over this and doing everything humanly possible to get that reversed. But Roma locuta est, causa finita est, as the old saying goes. Rome has spoken on it and has overruled this. And so far as I know, yeah, the Lipa case is not supernatural. Uh, if people can present evidence that proving something to the contrary, that is their right under canon law to present that to make their needs known to the pastors of the church. That's actually canon law, but you have to go about it properly. Waging war against the bishops of the church does not friends make. And people have to be very careful how they present these concerns. Uh, so if there's new evidence to be for consideration, let it be presented to the proper channels, always under the law of charity. If nothing new exists, then people have to accept what the church says. Uh, that's how I would respond to that.
All right. From Kaji. Kaji asks opinions on rice, fried rice, and rice dishes.
I am actually a keto guy, so fried rice, and rice dishes, not so much on my menu as of late. Uh, I went on keto on July 6th of 2015, and by July 1st of 2016, I had lost 144 pounds
Oh, wow.
on keto. Oh yeah, yes, very, very true. But if I do eat rice, I actually prefer fried rice or rice pilaf. My mother always makes rice pilaf very well with the butter. Well, she likes margarine, but I'm like, no, mom, get the butter. It's better. Uh, you want the fat, ma?
Mm.
There's the keto. But yeah, if I do eat rice, I do enjoy the rice pilaf or like the pork fried rice in Asian food restaurants. There's a great restaurant up on Route One in Saucus, Massachusetts, near where I grew up. It's called the Kowloon. And if I'm ever in Boston and if I can get to the Kowloon, I will break keto to eat at the Kowloon. I will do that. That I admit it. That I do. Uh, the last time I was able to do that was September of last year. My brother passed away, as many R&T viewers know. He passed away in March of last year, and I had to help settle his affairs. So the last time I ate at the Kowloon was back in September, I believe. I wasn't able to go when I was in Boston back in May because I had limited time. But yes, if I had been able to go, I would have broken keto for that too. So, so pork fried rice and rice pilaf, those tend to be ones that I enjoy.
Um, from Justin Trudeau, best Ohioan. Greetings. As you attended the Franciscan University of Steubenville, you obviously spent a large amount of time in Ohio. As such, what is your opinion of Ohio?
Oh, I did spend a large amount of time from 2000 to 2000 and beginning of January 2007 there in Ohio. I've only been back a couple of times since then, 2011 and 2019 respectively. Uh, unless I was driving through, but not actually like stopping anywhere. Um, and I did that actually as recently as May of this past year, driving through Ohio. Um, I was right there in the days where there was a lot of pollution in the Ohio Valley. So, and you couldn't drink the water. As a matter of fact, there's a very famous story of this girl who got sent home because because she was too fat. This is a famous story at Franciscan University. She was an athlete, right? And she kept drinking the water and she kept putting on weight. So when on Christmas break or summer break, whatever it was, she went to go see her doctor, and her doctor figured out what was going on, and he yanked her from Steubenville from attending the university for like medical leave, basically. And the reason why was because with all of the cows being pumped with the hormones in that area in the high industry, um, they there was a high content of estrogen in the water at the time. And this poor thing was drinking it, and her body was registering that she was pregnant. And I mean, I'm not a female, of course, but what is a woman, right? But as I understand it, a woman, when the body thinks that she is pregnant, she will put on weight to help support the child. Well, that's what happened. The hormones in the water threw her system off balance to where it registered that she was pregnant. So it triggered the pregnancy hormones, basically. And the poor thing got yanked. Now, that was a very famous legend. And I did get it confirmed later on. One day I was in the cafeteria and I was talking to this girl, and somehow the story got brought up. And she looked at me and she was just like, yeah, that's my friend. And I said, what? And she said, yeah, that's my friend. She's back now. And I said, you know the famous Steubenville legend? She's like, yeah, I guess. And I was like, where is she? I want to talk to her. And she was just like, I'm not going to tell you who she is because, I didn't want to embarrass the poor thing. Uh, but yeah. So, and then there were some mornings where you'd wake up and the fog had settled in along with all of the smog, and you were hacking up a lung. Oh, it was just disgusting. I myself was drinking the water my first semester at Franciscan, and I kept getting sick. I stopped drinking it that next semester, and I was basically fine. So I was known to, when I saw people drinking from the water fountain, I'd like yank them off of it, or I'd go buy them a bottle of water from one of the machines in the dorm or something. Uh, but Ohio itself, there's a lot of good people there. There's actually a lot of beautiful countryside too. A lot of people don't know about that. Uh, I prefer to drive through the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, the UP.
Mhm.
It's a lot more peaceful there, up driving through there, but there are some nice areas of Ohio too. Um, if you want to drive through them. And just as a quick side note, I remember when it was I think it was Hurricane Ivan. I was at Franciscan at the time, and Hurricane Ivan had blown through the Ohio Valley, and it brought that clean tropical. Basically, it cleared out all of the smog. And I remember going, "Oh my goodness, I can breathe! Look, it's fresh air, everybody!" Oh, that was a good time. So yeah, Ohio is very beautiful. I do enjoy some of the country areas. The city areas, not so much, with all due respect. But I'm more of a country guy anyway, so I'm a bit biased.
Real quick to clarify, you said you were driving through the Upper Peninsula or the Lower Peninsula?
I prefer to, what if I'm driving through the UP, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Um, I very much like to drive through the UP. It's very, very peaceful up there, the UP of Michigan. I feel very much interiorly at peace there.
Mm. Do you pass through Marquette, Negaunee area?
Yes, as a matter of
Okay.
fact, I do.
I have
I spent the summer
family
in
up
Ishmael.
there. Okay, yeah, I've got family up by there.
Anybody I might know?
I'd be very surprised, to be honest.
Well,
Uh,
I did spend a summer. You'll have to tell me afterwards who they are,
yeah,
if you don't mind. I might know them because
yeah, we
I
can.
spent the whole summer there on an internship in Ishpeming.
Sure, yeah, we can talk about that after the MA. From Fadaf. All right, let's get to the real questions. The third secret of Fatima. What do you know about it? And do you think the nature of the third secret is being overblown by conspiracists, or do you believe it has been revealed in the Lady of Akita, or are both of these apparitions entirely separate and are being overblown a bit? What's your opinion?
I have a whole book on the third part of the secret, FDAF, and basically the book is a response to various claims made by certain traditionalists who have who have created a whole body of literature and established a certain narrative, what I call the using a hermeneutic of suspicion and conspiracy. So the short answer is I know an awful lot about the third part of the Secret of Fatima. I have even been privileged to see a partial reproduction of one of Sister Lucia's unpublished letters that really provides a lot of perspective on what the third part of the Secret of Fatima is all about, in my humble subjective opinion. And I talked about that over a Catholic World Report back in November 2017. So I would refer you to that article for more information. Um, I do think that people have to have a proper understanding of the third part of the secret, and a lot of people don't have that proper understanding. So one of the things is they believe that it was about the assassination attempt on John Paul II's life. That's actually a very gross simplification of what it's all about. The third part of the secret of Fatima, as I said in my Fatima evangelization video for St. Paul Street Evangelization, is really all about the troubles of the church in this particular era of human history and the sacrifice and the fidelity required of Christians during this particular struggle. That's really what it's truly all about. And that is in keeping with the literal text of the vision as it was described by Sister Lucia. And so, like, for instance, am I allowed to mention specific persons? Let me just clarify.
Um,
Charitably, of course.
yeah, I don't see why not.
Okay. So, for instance, there's one interpretation about the secret of Fatima. See, that there's actually one secret in three parts, and there's an interpretation about the structure of the secret of Fatima. It has been championed by a number of people, including Taylor Marshall and I believe Tim Gordon. And I don't agree with them on this because they are coming from that hermeneutic of suspicion and conspiracy. And as a result, they have a skewed understanding of what it's really all about. They say there's the first part of the secret, they call it like 1A and 1B. So there's 1A, the vision, 1B, Our Lady's explanation of it. And then they say there's a 2A and a 2B, and then the third part of the secret is like 3A, 3B. So 3A is the written text, and 3B is the words of Our Lady that explain what the third part is all about. Well, that structure is incorrect. It's not 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, 3A, 3B, because Our Lady did show a vision of hell, and then she had words to explain it. Very few words, actually. After she showed them hell, she said, "You have seen hell where the souls of poor sinners go." That's it. That's it. Those are the only words that explain it. Then she bridged into the second part when she said, in order to save them, not souls already in hell, but from people going to hell, is what Our Lady was talking about there. And I have to clarify that because some people misunderstand that, especially people who are adherents to von Balthasarian and Bishop Bob Barron thoughts. Anyway, that's a whole other subject. But anyway, and I say that respectfully when I point that out about those folks. And then in the second part of the secret is about the devotion to the Immaculate Heart and what Our Lady called os meus pedidos, my requests. She said, in order to save them, God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart, she says. And, then she talks about how, if my requests are heeded, os meus pedidos, Russia will be converted and there will be peace. And she says, if not, Russia will spread her errors throughout the world and causing all kinds of negative, horrible, terrible things to take place, she says. That's the second part of the secret. Then the third part was only revealed in the year 2000, but because of the publication of the first and second parts of the secret, how that all went down, and there were all kinds of speculations that took place, certain questions were not directly tackled or tackled sufficiently. And so the conversations continued about how to understand these things, including that famous phrase that is the ending of the second part about Portugal and the dogma of the faith. Our Lady said, in Portugal, the dogma of the faith shall always be preserved. Well, people thought that there would be more words after that. Maybe, maybe not. But Lucia had written down the vision. That was the third part. And when you read her description of the vision, it corresponds almost word for word with what was in the second part of the secret. Almost word for word, image for image. So there's a harmony there, an organic unity between the three parts of the secret. In order to understand one part, you have to understand the others. And so people have to look at it from within that framework. If they look at it from outside of that framework, there's going to be problems. So this 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, 3A, 3B, that structure doesn't work because 2A would be the words of Our Lady. I'm sorry, 2A would have to be a vision if we're going to follow in suit. 2A would have to be some kind of a vision. And then 2B would be Our Lady's words. But there is no vision, strictly speaking, that precedes Our Lady's explanation. So that 1A, 1B, the AB distinction doesn't work. The structure it's a flawed explanation. And people have got to scrap that because if they continue to endorse and propagate this flawed notion of the structure, they're not going to understand the third part of the secret correctly. As you say, it'll be overblown by conspiracists because when you follow that structure, 1AB, 2AB, 3AB, that follows directly into the question of the so-called fourth secret of Fatima. And is Rome covering up another text, and all of that conspiracy nonsense on that front. So, yeah, so people have got to get rid of that flawed understanding because it doesn't do the secret of Fatima any justice to speak about it that way. If anything, you could say, the third part of the secret would be 2A if we're going to work within this system, because that if it is the visualization of what's in the second part of the secret, well, then there you go. There's your vision. There's the visualization. But I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. So hopefully that addresses the first part about it. Now, of your question, the second part about revealed on a lady named Akita, I defer again to what we said earlier about the distinction between the crying statue and its approval versus the alleged messages and how those have not been approved. Now, it is said that Cardinal Ratzinger said that the message of Akita and the message of Fatima are essentially one and the same. That's not proven. Ratzinger has actually not stated, and of course he's still alive, but he has not actually said that or affirmed that he in fact said those words to the ambassador Howard Dees. And so that's right now, I'm not saying that Howard Dees isn't telling the truth or anything, but what I'm saying is the statement has not been confirmed by Ratzinger. So Fatima and bishop opposing bishop, cardinal against cardinal, I mean, it all comes down to how we interpret the secret of Fatima. Ratzinger saw it in an eschatological light and the Novissimi with respect to things like death, judgment, heaven, and hell. And I talk about this in my book, one of the later chapters, actually. But there's a lot going on there, and we have to be very, very, very careful. Akita is not approved insofar as the alleged messages are concerned. So we don't want to combine things that aren't approved by the church because we could come up with the wrong math, basically. Like back in my day when I was learning how to do long division, you had to show your math. You couldn't just put the answer, but you had to show your math. And a small mistake, as St. Thomas Aquinas says in his on Being in Essence there, he says a small mistake in the beginning can lead to greater ones further down the line. So we have to be careful about Akita and combining it with Fatima when we don't, in fact, have certitude from the church that the messages of Akita, alleged messages of Akita, are approved. Hopefully that gives you some food for thought. I'm trying to look at the live chat too to see people's individual responses to things. So I apologize if I'm not catching everybody here. Excuse me.
Bless you. Here. From Pastor Jim's Fizzy Moo Moo Juice. Hello, Mr. Symonds. Do you believe in aliens, and what are your opinions on them?
This is a very popular topic right now after government documents were recently released on UFOs. And I believe Dr. Paul Thigpen, author of The Rapture Trap, which was a big book back in the day when I was in college, he recently wrote something else about this and was actually just on Michael Lofton's Reason and Theology. So it's a big topic that people are asking about right now. Um, it's possible that God has created creatures elsewhere in the universe that we just don't know about for whatever reason. We don't know it through natural knowledge or natural reasoning, and neither has it been revealed in divine revelation. So we are very, very ignorant on this subject. We just don't know. Um, I personally believe there was one strand of thinking about aliens being demons in masquerade, and I actually think that's actually the case. I do think that it's demons acting, deceptively in order to obtain some end of deception, to deceive people for whatever end. And I think this because as thrilling as some of these shows are about aliens and stuff, like I mean, I grew up watching X Files, Illuminati, you know. I know people associate that tune with the Illuminati nowadays, but I'm like, hi, I was watching X Files 30 years ago. Okay, it means X Files, Scully and Mulder. Okay. Uh, um. Anyway, I think that demons would want to deceive people in order to, in this way, in order to get them to start thinking about other things to take their attention off of God, perhaps, let's say, but like the thing about like aliens coming and experimenting on human beings, and people don't have recall; they either have repressed memories, and you have to go through hypnosis to get these issues, to remember things. You're starting to get into some pretty esoteric kind of stuff at that point, and demons can really mess with the human mind. So I kind of default on that side of I think that they're aliens or demons in masquerade. You know, it is certainly a school of thought that requires development. I'm not anticipating writing a book or anything on this particular subject. But if someone did want to do that, I'd be very interested to take a look at it. Um, Somebody, just real quick, and related to the question of aliens, um, is that ghosts. I do think that some ghosts are also demons. Other times, God will allow the soul of a deceased person to come back and request prayers. But I think largely a lot of the ghost phenomena are in fact also demons. Very few are in fact the souls of humans allowed by God to come back and request for prayers and stuff. I mean, what good does it do for a person in need of prayers to go around clanking chains or knocking on walls and stacking up chairs and silver, flatware, defying gravity, what, I mean, how is that a prayer request, No, that's indicative of an angelic intellect. Humans really could not do those kinds of things naturally unless you were just incredibly gifted, like balancing flatware and stuff. And that stuff does happen. That does happen. Like my former spiritual director uh, does work with exorcisms, and he also was involved in a case in Pennsylvania several years ago, and he also worked with Father James Labar, the Archdiocese of New York. And Labar had cases of exorcisms on tape where, and the actress Winona Ryder, she actually watched some of those tapes in preparation for a movie. This used to be in an article many years ago. It was public record. She watched these movies to watch these videos of Father Labar's in order to prepare for the role in the movie that she was starring in. I can't remember the name of the movie. Um, Father Labar told my former director once, he was like, oh yeah, he says, He's like, yeah, there was one time the demon was coming up, the girl was floating up to the ceiling, and he had to tell the demon, he's in charge here. Come on down now. He had that stiff upper lip and very Brooklyn, very New York accent. He was telling the demon, no, you come on down now. I'm in charge here. You come on down now. And all of a sudden, the levitating person suddenly went back down to earth. It is real. These things do happen. It is true. I've seen some wacko-jacko stuff. If anybody has seen the original 1984 Ghostbusters movie, there's that famous line from Winston Zeddemore that he has seen stuff that'll turn you white. Yes, it is extremely true. I've heard demonic tongues before. My friends and I were almost all killed in a satanic ritual sacrifice in April of 2005. That's a whole story. This stuff is very, very real. I knew a guy whose grandmother was a Buddhist and she was into some really weird stuff, but she was able to animate corpses with demons. And this guy said to me, he's like, Kevin, I've seen her do it. Like, I've seen it happen, like a reanimated corpse. He actually said to me, I've seen this. And I was like, are you serious? He's like, yeah. I was like, dang. But again, that's a demon doing these things. That's not an actual thing. The devil can really mess again with the human mind. But it does happen. I'm trying to think about some real. Oh, there was the night of the exorcism. Somebody asked about Ohio earlier. There was the night of the exorcism at Franciscan University. It was the first Saturday of February 2001. I remember that night vividly. There was a guy who had gotten into some occult practices over that Christmas break, and they were having a festival of praise. We called them FOPs back in the day, and they were praying in the chapel, Christ the King chapel, when this guy came into the chapel, all disheveled looking, sock off one shoe, foot, whatever, did whatever, and then he ran out, and they found him walking at the foothill of the university there. And they brought him into the chapel, and they were doing an actual full-blown exorcism on him. I remember that night vividly. And you could put your hand out in front of you. You could just feel the spiritual forces moving in the air. It was so creepy. Later, I was talking in September of 2002. I was talking with one of the friars, with a freshman named Joe, and the friar said there's never been an exorcism on campus before. And I almost contradicted him. I almost looked at him and said, Father, I'm a senior. I've been here for 2 years. It's like, don't lie to me. You can lie to the freshman over here because he don't know any better. But I'm a senior. I've been here. I know things. Like, don't you dare lie to me. I was here that one night. I remember the guy was from Tennessee, but boy, that was a freaky night. Let me tell you. Whew. So demons are real. Angels, good angels, that is, are also quite real. And they do help us. I'm kind of convinced that Our Lady and my guardian angel have worked overtime to get me out of so many different situations, especially while driving. There were a couple of times where I should have gotten into a big car accident, like somebody almost T-boned me or something, and but they never did. And I was like, how did that happen? They say guardian angels work overtime. Demons have certain preternatural abilities to affect the natural order. Angels, good angels, can also interact, but we want to focus on the good. We want to focus on the light, as it were, not the dark. So that's a little bit of an expanded discussion from aliens, but there you go.
Alrighty. From Ark, how would you respond to someone who's anti-Vatican II, accusing Tolkien of being the same, citing the famous story of him stubbornly continuing to say Latin during the newly vernacularized English?
Well, the question presumes that Vatican II did away with Latin. It didn't. Now, I know Ark didn't intend that. He's presenting, of course, how some people read it. He's not saying that's his interpretation of it. He's simply saying he's presenting what others think about it. So, but you have to point that out. Vatican II did actually wanted the ordinarium, the ordinary of the Mass in Latin. The whole thing was never meant to be in the vernacular. Would it be possible? Yes, but some Latin was to be maintained, especially in the ordinarium missae, the ordinary of the Mass, if I remember Sacrosanctum Concilium correctly. And so if Tolkien, in a way, would still sit there, and I have heard this story. I don't know what the source is, but if he did do that, well, I know I'm in good company because I still do. I do the same thing too. If I'm at Mass, the Novus Ordo, I actually do not say the English responses. I actually say the Latin. I do it usually sotto voce. I don't say it out loud so it doesn't confuse people around me. But I will do like when they're saying "Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world, and mercy." I'm sitting there going, "On this day, qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis," "O dona nobis pacem." Same thing with the Our Father, or the Kyrie usually is the problem. No, I take it back. No, they usually do say "Lord have mercy," "Christ have mercy," "Lord have mercy." Yeah, but I'll still say "Kyrie eleison," "Christe eleison," "Kyrie eleison." Um, but I do it in such a way where it doesn't attract attention to myself, and that's only because I prefer Latin as a prayer language, even in the liturgy, and I don't want to draw attention or to myself or distract from other people. So I do it sort of voce, and that's how I participate in it. So if Tolkien did the same, well, I think I'm in good company. But I'm not necessarily violating anything that the church has said because Sacrosanctum Concilium wanted Latin to be maintained. At least, I think it was in the ordinary, if I remember correctly. So, yeah, I mean, now if everybody did that, then there's going to be a problem. Because then you'd have the choir singing alone in English, nobody's chiming in. But yeah, I just prefer it in Latin, but I do it trying not to distract anybody. It's just I'm talking to God, and so it's kind of like I heard this one story about this priest where this woman came up to the priest because he was celebrating mass ad orientem. So of course then everybody was facing the same direction, so they could all see his back. And this lady went up to him and she was like, "Oh, Father, it was so much better. I couldn't hear what you were saying." And he looked at her and said, "That's okay, dear. I wasn't talking to you." Boom, sick burn. But it's the truth. It's like he wasn't. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to God. But that was a sick burn. Uh, but it was a good one too. So yeah, I do it too. I say it in Latin. Yes, I do. But I don't draw attention to myself.
Um, from Madeline. Hello, Mr. Symonds. Thank you so much for participating in our quirky little servers AMA. My question for you is, how did you end up where you are today, studying and writing books about Marian apparitions and personal revelations? Was it something you were always interested in, or did something inspire you to seek this path? Lastly, what have been some challenges you had to go through as you wrote and/or published your books? Did you receive lots of backlash?
Well, I kind of addressed the first part of this with my question. Thank you, Madeline, for your question. Um, but I kind of addressed the first part of it and talking about my background with the mystical stuff, and then learning more about the church's theology and finding out the truth of these matters and how to speak about them properly in Catholic theology, life, and thought. Uh, and yeah, so the subject of mysticism was something I was always interested in, and it goes back to very early days of my life. Uh, so the second part there have been some challenges I had to go through as I wrote or published the books. When I was working on the Fatima book, I was so knee deep. I mean, I was eyeball deep in the conspiracy theories. I had to take 6 weeks off. I think that was back in 2016. I had to take 6 weeks off, and I remember this. It was 6 weeks exactly because I was so knee deep into all of this. My head was spinning, and I was like, I need a break. And it was around April, I think, of 2016. Uh, And it was very beneficial because I kind of was able to put myself back together again, as it were, and recollect my energies and say, okay, now here's what we need to do. The Refractions of Light book, that was the first real book that I sat and wrote, and so I had to have that was Q&A, so it was a little bit easier to do. But it was just about being diligent and keeping up with it, and also refining as I learn things. I write and research usually in conjunction while I'm drafting something. So as new ideas come in or new things come to my attention, I'm forced to revise things. So it's a little extra work. I'm not really an outlining kind of guy. I just go for it. But I kind of like that. It's part of the discursos, throwing something around to see what it's made of. That's all part of it. Like right now, I'm working on a piece for all things wokeism, and I'm writing out the script for a video at the same time I'm also researching. I find it easier to do it that way because it's one thing, it's fun, but it's challenging me at the same time to really kind of say, okay, yeah, all right, this is what I need to do here, this, that, or the other thing. I need to get my hands dirty and work with it like mold or clay. This is kind of how I operate. Publishing the books, there was a thing with just finding a publisher for it. The St. Michael book, I had that. I submitted that to a couple different publishers. Nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted it. But Preserving Christian Publications in Boonville, New York, I got a hearing with the publisher, John Parrott, and at first he was kind of like, I'm not so sure about this. But once he found out that it was about Leo's vision and did he have one and all that, I remember that conversation on the phone. I could tell instantly I had him hooked. And he really helped to develop the manuscript into what it is today in the second edition. And I'll always be very grateful for that. The Fatima book, that was a little bit easier to pitch to one of the publishers because we were coming up to the year 2017, the centenary year that for Fatima, 100th anniversary, and a lot of people wanted to have material out on Fatima. So that was a fairly good sell for that with them. And it's not a devotional book. This is a book you have to take your time with, because there's footnotes, there's paper trails. I mean, you got to follow the money, as they say. But yeah, so there's that. So then, did you see lots of backlash? More so on the Fatima one. The traditionalists don't really like that book, my Fatima book. And for all sakes and purposes being, some of them even act like it doesn't exist. And as a matter of fact, back in February of this year, a very popular podcaster was talking about Fatima, and I engaged the person in the comments underneath, and I flat out stated, your scholarship is outdated. Well, they got very hot under the collar at me for having said that, but I shouldn't have said it that way. I should have been more diplomatic about it. I don't apologize for speaking the truth. But I do apologize for the manner in which I spoke about it. So to that person, I want to be very clear. I do apologize for the manner in which I communicated the point. But I do not apologize for speaking the point itself, because it is true. The person's scholarship is at least 5 years out of date. And so, yeah, there was even a cardinal, a very, very well-known cardinal, who got wind of my book. And word got back to me that let's just say he was not impressed. And I was I was deeply hurt. I was deeply hurt by that. I was very deeply hurt that when I learned what had happened, that cut. That really hurt me. I will not name the cardinal, but all I will say is I heard about it, and that hurt me very much. So yes, That's what I will. That's how I will answer that question. Thank you, Madeline, for your question.
Here. From Red Florida Man. Hello, Mr. Symonds. A bit more of a fun question since you have an interest in languages. Have you ever heard the following quote by Charles V, also known as Carlos I, of the Holy Roman Empire and of Spain? To God I speak Spanish, to women Italian, to men French, and to my horse German. I've often heard it expressed by Latinos and Spaniards, myself being the former, that Spanish can only be comprehended fully with God. You agree with the sentiment or not?
Spanish is a very beautiful language. I think I have heard of this quote. I don't know about the veracity of it because I don't know the source or the book, or if somebody knows what the citation is, and if it's a bona fide thing, yes, so be it. But I don't know if he meant to God I speak Spanish, saying can only be comprehended fully with God. I don't know if the emperor there, if he meant it as it's my first language, and so it's the language in which I am most comfortable talking with God, or if he meant Spanish was just so precise and beautiful that it's the language we should all be talking with to God. So a certain sense of element of pride there, or maybe a little combo of both. I don't know. I'd have to see it in its original context, but I have heard something similar, another version of it elsewhere, I think. But the fact about speaking German to the horse, that's kind of an insult. It's sprechen Sie Deutsch, Schweinehund. That's pig dog. That's a high German insult. Calling someone a pig dog. I won't repeat the other word. Although I was at work the other day, just yesterday, in fact, over at the Dollar General, and I got to talking with one of the customers there. He was like, "Yeah, I grew up with the German, and all I remember my grandfather saying," and then he said the word, and I looked at him, and I was just like, "Oh, I know enough about that. I know what you just said." And he just broke a certain commandment about taking God's name in vain. I was like, "Oh no, that's bad. You shouldn't be doing that." Um, yeah. So, but yeah, if somebody could show me where it is, what the reference is, the book and all, basic book, chapter and verse, I would be able to understand better, I think, the context of what he meant by that. Um, Spanish is a very rich language. I love especially Spanish artwork, religious artwork in particular. They do a very good job bringing out many different angles of religious mystery. There are some beautiful pictures for free on like Pixabay and stuff like that of some Spanish artwork and stuff of like Christ, especially during Holy Week. Some of them are just dropped it, gorgeous, you know. Um, and I always admire looking at those photos because it's very rich artistically. So yeah.
Um, Alrighty. From Jay Tarode. Mr. Symonds, you do such great work over at Reason and Theology. Thank you for your insights. Lord willing, Sister Lucy is canonized. What plans do you have in Thanksgiving?
I would probably throw a little bit of a party. I would probably also write a letter to the Carmel of Coimbra, just expressing my gratitude. And the prioress, Sister Anna Sophia, wonderful woman, just wonderful. There are videos about with her on YouTube. You can look them up. Most of them are Portuguese, though. Very very few are English. Um, but I would probably do that. Write a letter to them, just expressing, my gratitude for everything. Um, I might be tempted also to throw a little bit of a party here. Just invite some close people over. Yeah. But certainly being thankful to God. I'd like to think that I would participate in the mass for that, even maybe even if it's just going to my parish here in town that day. Um, I'd like to think that I'd be able to do something like that. Yeah. I do have a prayer for her canonization that was given to me by Sister Sophia, now of course Prioress Sophia, um, and I have it in my. I'm a Benedictine oblate, and hence the Bedine monk. Uh, and I keep it in my Benedictine breviary. That card, it has a second class relic of Sister Lucia in there, so that's with me every day. So yeah.
Um, right from Seeking Testing 213. Hi, Kevin. I love watching you on Reason and Theology. What do you think Taylor Marshall should change to fix his messaging and get back on track?
This is a very controversial question. Um, and I will address it because look what I just said earlier about being tackling things directly. Um, for one, he needs to return people's messages that call or text or email him. He's got to destroy this echo chamber that he has built up around himself. He doesn't really take criticism too well, as far as I can tell, or he deals with it in very different ways than what a lot of people, I think, would expect. So, for instance, in late May of last year, 2021, we, over at Reason Theology, myself, Michael Lofton, and River Run, had a two-part series on Infiltration, Taylor Marshall's book. Well, a little over a month later, one of the main points of contestation that I have with Taylor Marshall is when he had taken material, or looks like he had taken material, out of chapter 5 of my book on the Prayer to St. Michael, an original observation that is unique, as far as I know, to my book. He took that observation and started talking about it in his book, chapter 5 of Infiltration, and did not properly cite me. I don't believe for 2 seconds that he did the same kind of original research. I think he found that in my book and, decided to talk about it in his book. And that's all fine and good if somebody wants to do that. But he really, really should have had a footnote that said C.F. Symonds page number. But after we did that show, especially part 2, we kind of got more into those issues, the specific issues with the book. It was around July 5th that he made a whole video talking about the very thing that I had just mentioned. So I don't, as having like, it's like, Taylor, you like, buddy, hello, and I don't know if he was trying to put his thumb in my eye or if he was genuinely ignorant of what had been said. I don't know. I have made numerous attempts over the past 3 years to contact Taylor between email, text, and calling him up directly because I have his phone number and email. And he hasn't returned any of my calls since September of 2018. Because what happened was he had written me an email in September of 2018 to invite me to come on his podcast. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to do it at that time. And he wrote me an email, gave me his phone number. I called and I talked to him and I explained that I would have to, let me look to see if I'm going to be able to do it. But when he found out that I was not, we talked about 2 things in particular, Leo's vision and also the Fatima discussions. And during the course of that conversation, I had revealed that I took a critical eye on Leo's vision, but also I didn't entirely agree with the Father Gruner Fatima Center interpretation of the third part of The Secret. And I remember once he found out those things, I could literally hear it was like you can hear the deflation in his voice. He lost interest in me almost immediately. I remember that. I only wish I had the conversation recorded. And the conversation ended otherwise, peacefully, amicably. And when I found out that I wasn't going to be able to do the show, I tried to contact him, but he had ever since then I haven't heard a peep out of him. So then, as I said last year, we make these videos on R&T, and I point out how that the issue of chapter 5 of my book and chapter 5 of his book, and then a little over a month later, he makes a video on that very point. And I'm sitting here thinking, are you trying to thumb your nose at me? Are you trying to throw salt in an open wound? Or are you deliberate, or are you truly, truly ignorant of all of this criticism that we've just provided on your book? Are you listening to what people are saying here? You know, so I say this to elucidate the point, which is he really needs to listen to what people are telling him. Taylor Marshall in some ways reminds me of myself. He had been what many people call red-pilled by August of 2016. He saw that some things were not well in the church, and he was seeking answers. So he turned to the thesis of infiltration, as it were, or ended up turning to that thesis in order to explain all of the ills in the church. And I remember earlier this year, I caught a clip of one of his videos, and he flat out stated, the church was an infiltrator. He's like, I don't trust Rome. I don't trust Rome. He actually said that, I don't trust Rome. And I'm going, well, then, the devil's got you in the crosshairs there, buddy, because you've just admitted publicly that there's a problem now with you in being in communion with the Holy See. If you're viewing the Holy See with all of this suspicion, what does that say for the state of your being in communion with the Holy See and the Pope of Rome? What does this say? In other words, have you conflated the thesis about infiltration so that there really is no true church anymore? Are you going for the Anne Catherine Emmerich, the two church theory there with one of her alleged visions there in the 19th century? I mean, there's all kinds of questions that come up and arise from this, and people are not asking these questions. Now, Michael Lofton does, and I think he does some excellent work. And hopefully people who watch R&T, Reason and Theology, they are picking up these cues, and they're learning, and they're paying attention and going, yeah, actually, all's not well on the Western frontier, So the question being, what should he change to fix his messaging and get back on track? As one priest put it to me, Taylor Marshall is a good guy, he's a smart guy, but he has to surround himself with good people. Otherwise, he's going to get too cocky. And that's basically what has happened. And I said earlier, he reminds me of me. How do I know? What do I mean? Well, I had heard many years ago about infiltration, 3 days of darkness and all these prophecies, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Marshall hasn't had the kind of guidance. Earlier I mentioned that guidance. I had good, solid people helping me. He's lacked that, as far as I can tell anyway. I believe that he has lacked that kind of foundation. He is a convert from Anglicanism. I think he was even purportedly an Anglican priest. And I think that there are some things there worth investigating, but I think that he's just kind of lost in a way. And when he is shunned, people like me and others, I mean, even Michael Lofton has said, he's welcome to come on the show. we can talk about stuff. Lofton has said this publicly, even recently, past month, I think. My phone is still open. I don't have Taylor Marshall blocked. If he were to call and talk to me, which is all I've ever wanted, for him just to call and say, let's talk. We have to have a come to Jesus moment here, because his message is really leading people down a very bad path. And I think that he needs to reassess things, recognize being red pilled, of course, but surrounding yourself with good people to help keep you on the straight and narrow. I think that's going to be a big component towards providing a better message, uh, and providing a better message.
All right. From wait a minute. Jeremy, yeah, Jeremy asked a question earlier. Jeremy, I'm going to skip this one and go on to the next one there since you already had one. From this is Welsh, I assume, because of the flag in their profile picture. But it looks like Welsh much about. I'm gonna say. Hi Kevin.
Much about, yeah.
Yeah.
Luther.
Yeah. Hi Kevin. Do you know what arguments were used to convince a Seed or a SSPXer to rejoin communion with Rome, possibly through joining societies like the FSSP or the ICKSP?
This is an area, admittedly, where I'm a bit lacking in. But I will answer in accordance to the best of my understanding and knowledge. Of course, I don't agree with sedevacantists. And even though I know people within the SSPX and talk to them on the phone and stuff, they know that I don't agree with the SSPX. In conversations on the SSPX, though, I have found it to be very helpful to focus on the concept of the supplied jurisdiction, the church in a crisis, because this is really the crux of how the SSPX operates. I was in a conversation once with somebody. The SSPX had just built their new seminary, I think in Virginia, I think it was. And very simple question: who gave them the authority to do this? What bishop gave them the authority to do this? And the person was kept on trying to go back to the whole supplied jurisdiction, the crisis in the church. And I looked at them and I said, your whole argument revolves around that. And they actually argued. They said, no, it doesn't. And I said, yes, it does. And they tried to argue it, but ultimately they kept going back to crisis in the church. We have the power to do this stuff, supply jurisdiction. And so I just finally said to the person, I was just like, are you listening to yourself? You keep saying that that's not the main argument, but yet that's what you keep arguing. Well, they just stopped talking. We just cut that into the conversation. Another time, how many of you here, I'll flip over here to the live chat, but how many of you have heard of Michael Voris and Church Militant?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see how many. Okay. I'm seeing Mr. Jeremy says yes. Okay. Forgione e Dragonite. Okay. Envy, yes, okay. So in somewhere time between April and July of 2020, I was talking with a member of the SSPX, Dyed in the Wool SSPX. And by this point, Church Militant and Christine Niles had issued their first spotlight episode on the SSPX. That came, I think, in April of that year, 2020. And I was talking with this SSPX person. And I kid you not, this person actually said that Michael Voris was in league with the deep state/deep church because only the SSPX were giving out communion during the pandemic. I kid you not. And I shut that down. I shut that conversation down really quick. I did not continue that conversation because that was so absurd and outlandish. I just simply said, there's no way. No. I could not have a rational conversation. This person was reacting emotionally, not logically. Michael Voris is deep state / deep church because only the SSPX has been giving out communion during the pandemic. Those don't even correlate logically. But that Spotlight episode raised some good questions. And I will say that I know somebody, the main person in that story, Jassy Jacobs, her and I have a mutual friend, and that mutual friend introduced us. And I spoke to her, and, I believe her story. I do believe her story. And I talked to somebody in the SSPX about all of this, and I cannot even repeat what this person said to me publicly, because if I said it out loud, if Jassy ever heard it, the poor thing would just be an absolute emotional wreck, and she would just be in tears. But this is how extensive people in the SSPX sometimes will go in order to defend their position. They will go to the absurd. One person actually used the word deranged. That actually, when I was talking about this stuff, they said to me, the person just shook their head and they were just like, these people are deranged. Now, I don't, I, you know, I know people in the SSPX. I don't think I can I don't want to use the word deranged, but if you're going to use arguments like the ones that I've just said, or responding the way that you do, I can see why people would think that you are deranged. That I will say. Uh, what was the? Oh, there's all kinds of stories. I'm full of stories. Um, but to get it back to the point, the question being, of course, what can we do to help them? You have to always gauge the individual. Can you engage them? Can you talk with them? A lot of SSPX people they're very good people. They are. They're very good people. Like I said, I'm cool with some of them. Others you are going to find to be you cannot have a civil conversation. But you take it as it comes, as God puts people in your life and stuff. But as far as specific points, with the SSPX, I really, really think it's going to come down to supply jurisdiction and the crisis in the church. A lot, it will come down to that, because that's going to be ultimately the fallback argument. At least in my experience, that it has been. With a sede vacantist, if we haven't had a valid pope since the death of Pius XII, well, all the cardinals up to that point are dead, so who elects the pope? The Holy Spirit, I've heard one of the answers is, well, the Holy Spirit will just alight upon somebody, and that person will be the pope. And I'm like, so apostolic succession gets broken? How does this work? So I don't know. I might be overly simplifying it. I don't know all of the positions of sede vacantism. I do know Mario Dirksen. He did a wonderful takedown of Taylor Marshall and infiltration a couple of years ago on his Tradicast. He had a really good, I don't agree with the sede vacantist elements, but he had a really good takedown, especially in, I think, the first one. I think there were two parts. He had an excellent takedown. So again, you find common ground and you can talk to people, but if you can't talk to people, then you have to move on. And pray for people. But again, I wish to reiterate, I don't have a problem with people necessarily. I may disagree, and I'm not trying to smack anybody around, but I do think that we have to be very careful. We have to be respectful, and engage accordingly, if when and where possible.
All right. Our next one comes from Meep. Meep says, "Hi, Kevin. Should we believe Dante's Inferno, or that heaven is eternal connection with God, while hell is eternal separation?"
Last year, I revealed on Reason and Theology that I was allowed to experience hell. The short version, the quick way that I explain it to people, as I say to people, is that I was actually allowed to see hell and or experience hell. Um, excuse me. Um, and I have become after that experience, I have become absolutely convinced that hell is that deprivation from God. I don't really question that. Uh, if people respond in the live chat, if they say they want to hear the story, I will tell the story. Somebody's already commented about how this has been a long AMA. I don't want to, beleaguer it anymore, but I will tell the story to elucidate it if people wish. Um, okay, well, we've got a lot of people here. They do want to hear it. Okay. All right. Well, okay. As I mentioned earlier, in another life, I was known as Brother Gregory. I was in a Benedictine monastery, and this was December of 2009. That's right. It was around December. Yeah, it was Christmas Eve. Um, I every so often, like people talk about the sixth sense, like something that we just know something is wrong or something is about to happen. Sometimes that happens with me. And December 24th, 2009 was one of those days for me. I just had a sense that something wasn't right, or there was something about to happen. Kind of hard to explain, but it was just this growing sense within me. It was beyond my control. It was just developing. And of course, midnight mass takes place on the 24th. And I decided that, okay, I'm just tired. We're up early. As monks, I'm tired. I just want to go to bed. So I took a nap. And when I woke up, I still had that feeling. Well, no, I wasn't just excited for Christmas, Madeline. I wish it was just that. And please know that there's a much larger context to this story, but I'm just telling the story itself, the piece in question. Well, during the mass, all of the monks were standing, and because they had this monastery had the custom of having the monks up in the sanctuary with chairs a little further. They don't surround the altar, like we'll walk right up to the altar itself, but it's a little further out in the sanctuary. And all of a sudden, that interior sense just came flying up at me, and there was this vision before the eye of my soul. It was this cavernous pit, if you will, black as all get out, and there were like stalactites and stalagmites around the edges of my like a picture frame, but they were like stalactites and stalagmites. But that feeling that I experienced up to that point, it was like it swirled, and as I was witnessing this image before the eyes of my soul, the eye of my soul, there was this intense feeling of that utter hopelessness, that deprivation. And I knew immediately what it was. And it was that total deprivation from God. Like you were just so cut off from God. Like you were like boom, like you are in mortal sin. You know, you are for all eternity. And it was so overwhelming that I just kind of like, I don't want to say I blacked out or blanked out, but blanked out might be the better word. I didn't black out, but I almost blacked out. I almost collapsed to the ground, and I almost had to grab a hold of one of the monks standing next to me in order to keep myself standing upright. No, Mr. Jeremy, this is not the Dark Night of the Soul. This is definitely something much different. Uh, and it was very, very crazy. I almost had to grab a hold of one of the monks. Uh, how do I know it wasn't a panic attack? Because I do have anxiety attacks from PTSD, and I know what those are. This was not that. When you have an anxiety attack, you feel like someone's shooting you with adrenaline. That's not this. This was an entire. I can only tell people they are two different feelings. It's a good observation for Gione, but they are two separate things. And that feeling was just so powerful and so potent that I just kind of like blanked out. I don't remember much of what happened around the time where all of this was going on. I knew I was at mass. If you had seen me at mass, if you were like out somewhere in the church or something, everything would have looked about normal to the exterior vision. But interiorly, there was a lot of drama going on. A lot of drama going on. Um, and I almost collapsed because of how potent the feeling was, of just how overwhelming it was. That sense of deprivation and no hope. Um, the feeling was more in the heart, not so much the head. Um, my intellect recognized what the feeling was. And I knew that there were going to be things that were going to happen. I knew things were going to happen. Uh, and I didn't have to wait very long. 3 days later, I got a summons to go to the novice master's office. Oh, that's a whole other story. But let's just say that God was getting me ready for some very serious stuff that was about to come on my plate. But it had also been preceded by a vision of Christ crucified. I was at the chapel. I don't remember the precise date. I wrote all about this, by the way, in my journals. I kept a journal since 1996, and I wrote about it in my journal at the time, so I have to consult the journal for the precise dates. But it was this event on Christmas Eve was preceded by a vision of in the Blessed Sacrament side chapel. I was there early one morning before morning prayer lauds, and I was just praying, and all of a sudden, an image of Christ crucified appeared in uh, almost like the folds of they had a tabernacle veil, almost like the folds of the tabernacle veil kind of did that. Now, of course, with me and my critical mind, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, is this the lights shining a certain way, creating the shadows, I had done work with Photoshop, so I knew something about shadows and whatever. So and plus just general theological knowledge. I'm discerning this at the same, looking at this and testing it to see at the same time that the vision's happening. It wasn't the lighting. It was not the lighting. This was an actual vision of seeing Christ crucified in front of the tabernacle. And I had an interior sense that I was being told to really gird my loins because I was about to go through some pretty serious stuff. Um, yes, my eyes were opened. Um, Somebody just asked in the lighting in the live chat, and I knew that there was going to be some pretty serious stuff. I did not have long to wait. I did not have long to wait. It happened very quickly. Uh, and I entered into a very dark period of my life there in the monastery from the 28th of December onward of 2009 going into 2010. But God, I believe, was merciful to me by showing me these things in order to help me with my particular circumstances. I'm not getting into the whole story, of course, because I'm trying to protect people, first and foremost myself. But yeah, there was a lot going on there. So when I talk about extraordinary things happening in people's lives through prayer, I do speak from experience. Yes, I do. I do. Um, and um, I'm trying to remember what the original question was. Uh, oh yeah, the eternal separation. Um, yeah, so because of what I was allowed to experience, yeah, there are no words in any of the tongues of men that could describe what hell truly is like. Not even Spanish. Hopefully, people got the joke. Uh, there are no words, none. Um, and so it is very real. Any of the tongues of men sounds like Tolkien, Mystic Jeremy says. Yeah, what about Elvish? Luar Hienin, Nudolan Iviu, Anaraknuilu, Guanadu, and Guayaslin, Dragonite. Uh, that's actual Elvish. Um, yeah, so I don't even know. I don't think there are, probably not even Tolkien's Elvish, um, but yeah, it's bad. It's bad. But people willingly send themselves there because they are so far from God at the time of their death. Their will becomes fixed in death. Death metaphysically seals your will. And so, even if there's a final act of God's mercy, somebody can reject that and willingly send themselves to hell. And that, as St. Bridget of Sweden once talked about, is a very because she was allowed to see a soul do just that in one of her visions. She was allowed, I think it was Bridget of Sweden. She was allowed to see somebody choose hell. And it was frightening to her, scared the living daylights out of her. And I can honestly relate to that. Uh, I really can. Uh, you don't want to go to hell. You don't want to go there. So hopefully that provides some story there for everybody. But um, Garfield says hell is bad. Well, oh, it's beyond bad. Uh, you know, Now, of course, these are my own experiences. People are free to reject it. People, I'm not saying, I don't think I'm saying anything that's out of line with Catholic teaching, but nobody is obliged to accept what I say as gospel truth. Uh, Hell is real. That's true. I mean, we are obliged to believe that. But for someone like myself to say, yeah, this is my experience. Well, no one has to believe it. But yeah, now, of course, I've also had very intense moments of experiencing God's love. Um, so I'm not saying it's all doom and gloom. um, yeah. So there are a lot of intense moments of that love of God as well. So yeah, I should probably just stop talking about that. Potato Infallibility says, give Satan a 1-2 punch. Hail Mary, full of grace, punch the devil in the face. That is one of the popular memes goes.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty. From Mari. Hello, Kevin. Thank you for answering our questions. I know a lot of people who either ignore Marian apparitions or don't believe in them at all, and a few people who seem to build their entire faith life around them, even ones that weren't approved by the church. What would you say is the proper place for private revelations within a Catholic's life of faith? What would be a prudent and fruitful way to approach them in your opinion?
This is an excellent question, Mary. Thank you. The proper place of a private revelation within a Catholic's life of faith is to assist them to grow in the deeper in holiness and the three theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. Anything that brings us closer to Christ is meant to be helpful for us, of course. Anything that takes us away from him is bad. This is all Cardinal Ratzinger, by the way, in his theological commentary on the Message of Fatima. So a proper place for private revelations within the Catholic life of faith is, especially with the devotional aspect of it. Then you have people who are a bit more academic or scholarly, like myself, and we can take on that end of things as well. But it is the piety that informs. Like, I couldn't do all this work on Fatima if I didn't have a strong religious, like, piety, Eusebius, if I didn't have something like that at the basis of all of this. Otherwise, why bother? Why go through the headache of it all? So the proper place is meant to help us. It's not meant to be the faith itself. If we mistake it for the faith itself, then we are so out of line. We are way out of whack at that point. We are in bad territory. So a prudent and fruitful way to approach them, approved ones, is to look at it. Like, first of all, is there something in any approved one that resonates with you? Does there seem to be a deeper draw there that's drawing you further into holiness and being in communion, koinonia, with Christ? Or is it a mere curiosity? Is it a plaything? If it's a curiosity or plaything, stay away. Some people don't have any sentiments at all, but they end up getting hooked into it through some means. Like, I didn't anticipate getting so deep into Fatima studies, but I ended up doing it because it was an outgrowth of the Leo XIII work. Plus, I just got sick in that book, and then I just got sick and tired of hearing of all of this conspiracy stuff. So I said, "Fine, I'm just going to get to the bottom of it all. Is there the fourth secret?" Plus, at the time, there was a book that had just come out, a biography on Sister Lucia, and it provided some new information that gave us a fresh perspective on some of these debated matters. So that contributed. That was at the heart of how I was able to do all that anyway. So some would say the stars aligned, Um, but as far as a devotional aspect of it, if it's leading somebody closer to Christ, if it is, speaking of the church approved ones, I mean, maybe, now if somebody is promoting the latest apparition and like Medjugorje, for instance, Medjugorje is not approved. Let me say that again. Medjugorje is not approved. Whenever I hear the latest monthly message to Miriata or Maria Pavlovich, I just sit there and I just like, people, please just stop it. Have you read the Catechism lately? Have you picked up a papal encyclical and read it? Uh, just quit it. Like, stop the nonsense. If you make private revelations out to be the faith, you're done. You've idolized it. You know. I've known people who have done that kind of thing over the years. I'll even tell you one thing. There was the condemned apparitions in Bayside, New York. I remember coming across two women one day. I don't remember their names. I don't remember much else, but I remember coming across them, and they were not right. They were not right. They were so into Bayside. Everything revolved around Bayside. And I remember as they took off in their cars, No joke. I'm not lying. This honestly happened. As they took off in their cars, their faces suddenly distorted in demonic looking shapes, like demonic looking faces. And I remember seeing that and just getting like a shudder, as it were, because I was like, you know. And I think I was with somebody. I think I asked them, "Did you see that?" You know, they didn't, um, but I did. Creeped me the heck out. Um, so these kinds of things float around in my background, um, and they help to inform me a little bit about some of these matters and some of the controversies. Uh, yeah. So hopefully that was a helpful answer to that.
Alrighty. From one of our Mother Superiors, Snails, what's your favorite Marian prayer?
You know, I do pray the rosary every day. I also love the Akathist, and I also do enjoy the the Agni Parthene. Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I'm a devotee of the Rosary, and I do every year the consecration according to Saint Louis de Montfort. But I do pray the Rosary every day. Um, but I also enjoy some of those beautiful Eastern hymns to Our Lady, like the Akathistos and the Agni Parthene, Action Est in slash Dostoino Jest. Um, as a matter of fact, at the beginning of my debate argument with Christopher Ferrara, I'm going to pull it up here actually. I actually wrote that down. It's at the very beginning. Uh, yep, here it is, right here on my website. My debate argument. I actually had it at the top. I was going to offer. Uh, I was going to offer this prayer at the beginning of that debate. I didn't do it, but um, have you guys ever heard it? Ever chanted before? Have you guys ever heard this before? Chanted in Greek? What does the hive mind say? Captain Nemo wants to know what question we're on. We're on Snails' question from 2:24 p.m. What's your favorite Marian prayer? Okay, Mr. Jeremy says yes, he has. There's one on there's one on YouTube. Uh Axion estinos alidos, Macaris insetin theortorcon, Tinain marcaris ton que panamomiton, que mitera tu theurimon, Tinti miho teran ton hierubi, que endoxo terra, Asinkritos ton seraphi, in ardi of toros theon lorgon tercusan, tinon tos theotokon, ser megalino. Oh, it's just beautiful, beautiful stuff. Now y'all can say I've heard it chanted before. However, um, so yeah, uh, I do enjoy Gregorian chant, by the way. I can't belt out secular tunes half the time, but I can belt out Gregorian chant every so often. Um, so, uh, yeah, I enjoyed those prayers. I do. Rosary, Akathist, Dostoino Jest / Action Estin, and the Agni Parthene. Somebody was just trying to get a hold of me on my phone. That's okay. They're gonna have to wait.
Ready. From Ashley Kesu. Hola, Kevin. What line of persuasion has best worked for convincing non-Christians that the apparitions did occur?
Hmm. What line of persuasion has best worked for convincing non-Christians that the apparitions did occur? Um, that's going to depend upon the person. Some people are more scientifically minded. Some people are more critically minded. Others might be more emotionally minded. It's going to depend. You have to kind of look at the person. A lot of people nowadays are just skeptical. So if they have that skepticism, then you can approach it from the scientific perspective. Now, of course, it's not possible to prove everything through science. Otherwise, we engage in the error known as scientism. But something like Fatima, like I said, with the miracle of the sun and the drying of the ground, you really can't explain all of that. With the drying of the ground, especially. How do you explain the miracles at Lourdes, the healings? Well, you either believe the doctors or you don't. But how do you believe? How do you say that they did occur? Well, Jesus talks about things like the fruits, but this question is about convincing non-Christians that the apparitions did occur. I'd have to have more of like a scenario, I guess, with more of the specifics, because if we're talking to like a Buddhist or a Hindu, or Muslim, or I mean, there's all different kinds of ways that we can look at it. Usually, you're not talking about apparitions to people who are non-Catholics, non-Christians. You're not really kind of getting into that first. It's possible, depending upon the person's interests, but usually you don't get into that kind of stuff first. Like with me, I'm one of the exceptions because I already had an idea, an eye for all things mystical, but not everybody has that, So I guess, Ashley Kesu, it would really depend upon the situation and who you're talking to and where they're at in life in order to help them raise them up to higher understanding. I can't give a flat out best persuasion. It's just going to depend upon who you are talking to, who you are engaging. So maybe if you can elaborate at some point, that'd be great. Or Captain Nemo's.
Yeah, I think didn't we have? Yeah, we had one from Captain Nemo earlier, so we're gonna skip over this one, Nemo. Our next one is from Giggles. She says, "Hello, Kevin. How should we respond to people who downplay the importance?"
How to respond to people who downplay the importance of Mary. Some of that's going to continue. Giggles. If I don't know if you are in the live chat or if anybody y'all want to hear a hilarious story that actually gets into this live chat, Hive Mind. Okay, so one of my friends from college, his nickname was Skippy, real name John. And if you know where to look, you'll find him on Facebook. He told us this story once, and he went to school. I don't remember. I think he said it was high school, maybe, but he went to the school where he was one of like 6 Catholics. Everybody else was all Protestant. And he had a female friend who didn't know that he was one of the Catholics. She found out one day. She went to her locker, got her Bible, found him in the hallway, came up behind him, patted him on the shoulder, and said, "Mary is the whore of Babylon." Now, Skippy is a very witty guy, okay? And he just stood there and he was just like, "Oh no." And he turned around and he said to her, "If Mary is the whore of Babylon, then Jesus is her bastard son." Now, at first glance, that sounds like a horribly insulting thing, but that's not how it was intended. Potato infallibility is correct. That was a sick comeback. Yes, it was. So it was rather hilarious. That girl just got wrecked. Yes, she did. She got wrecked. But it was true. He dropped a truth bomb, a logical truth bomb. If this, then that. Just if this, then that. Very logical. And he said, and as he was, he completed the story. He said, and as I was turning back to talk with my people there, the group there, He said, Kevin, the look on her face, Bible open in the hand, and her mouth just like gaped, truth bomb. It was one of those, like the popular meme of all those guys. They're like, they're all looking like, there's like trees behind him or something. So yeah, but it was very true. So now, not everybody, of course, is as witty as John. I'm not as witty as John. I don't know if I would have come up with something that fast. Um, I'm much more of the intellectual type, where it's just like, okay, well, let's talk about that. Uh, no. I don't know whatever happened to that girl, or if she ever became Catholic. I don't know. But sometimes well thought out, very quickly witty responses will do more than a whole doctoral dissertation on the subject. Um, so if you can be witty, be witty. Hashtag be like John, be like Skippy. Y'all want to hear another story about Skippy? Okay. Everybody's going, yes. Okay, so we're all in Austria together. We're taking Christian marriage with Dr. Donald Ashe. And there's always, every year, he always has this part of the course where he's talking about sterilization and, spaying and neutering and all that. So we're all in class, and Dr. Ashe is talking about how it's okay to neuter Skippy the dog, but it's not okay to neuter, Mike the dude, Mike the guy, Mike the dude, And he's talking constantly about neutering Skippy. And we're all sitting there, and the sniggers are happening. The sniggering is happening, the Snickers and all that. Everybody's like, And then finally it rose to the pitch. Dr. Ashe, who was a very proper, conservatively dressed kind of guy, standing there at the podium, he stops the lecture and he goes, "What is so funny?" And I remember T.J. Fromsdorf answered. He stood up out of his seat a little bit and he pointed to Skippy, who was sitting behind him, and he said, I remember his exact words, 20 years later. He said, "Dr. Ashe, his name's Skippy." And TJ pointed to Skippy. We lost it. We absolutely lost it. I mean, we absolutely just lost our stuffing. Okay, we were laughing so hard. And even Dr. Ashe was beat right in the face, and he's standing at the podium, and he's all just like, "I've never had that happen before." And then he's like, "Rex, is there anybody here named Rex? It's okay to neuter Rex the dog, but not Mike the dude." Oh, it was so funny. Absolutely so funny. We had a good laugh out of all that. And then when one of my friends went to Austria like a year or two later, I said to him, "Could you do me a favor?" He's like, "What's that?" And I said, "When you go to Austria and when he reaches the part where he's talking about sterilization, could you tell me if he asks if anybody is in the name Skippy?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Yeah, sure." And after the guy came back from Austria, I asked him, I said, "Did he do that?" He said, "Yeah, in fact, he did do that." Oh, yes. Okay. That was a. So again, how can we respond? If you can be witty within certain bounds, of course. What Skippy did was a bit borderline it was a bit irreverent, but it still communicated the point. So if you can be witty, be witty. Otherwise, you might have to uproot error a little bit more carefully through dialogue and conversation. Um, but one thing that I found that will always work is, if you think that by insulting the Blessed Virgin that Jesus is going to be happy with you, you got another thing coming. So stuff to consider.
Hey. From FM Thomas. Hello there. What do you think about pagan gods? And do you think they're real in the sense of being something pretending to be a god, demons, etc.?
I wholeheartedly agree with what St. Augustine said in De Civitate Dei. He actually addressed this very subject. And he did say that they were demons deceiving human beings. So I believe Augustine had the higher argument on that. And I mean, we can always argue some of the finer points, but I do think Augustine was correct in De Civitate, on the City of God, De Civitate Dei, on that. So if you wanted to know more about what Augustine said, I would refer you, F.M. Thomas, to what Augustine said in on the City of God. But I do think that they were demons masquerading and deceiving people in that way back then as well as now.
And from Assumption AGI Pi Guy. Greetings from outside the ring road of 128. I said I live near Boston because it's the closest major city, but I live an hour's drive away. At some point, 2.5 to 4 years ago, I first read some mention of a set of 5 redemptive mysteries of the Rosary, which, according to a certain Gene Clark on telltheworld.info, are 1. Faith, 2. Reconciliation, 3. Death, 4. Judgment, and 5. Salvation. In Clark's own words on the website, I am proposing the 5th rosary, as given to me by the Blessed Mother, is the final rosary, and I was suspicious of that sentence as soon as I read it. Personally, I think it makes sense as a
As
spin-off
well as
rosary.
you should be. I just clicked on this link. As well as you should be is the final rosary. What final? What? What do you mean the final rosary?
Yeah, I
This is-
assume the intention is the final set of mysteries, but even that doesn't make much sense. But to finish up the question, personally, I think it makes sense as a spin-off rosary like the Memento Mori rosary, not part of the traditional Benedictine rosary, which would contradict part of the claimed revelation if taken that way. The same website claims that Cardinal Sean O'Malley gave an imprimatur on it, so I could probably ask my own Archbishop's office directly. But do you have a take on this? P.S. Disambiguation. A certain Lucian Lucia has posted online a completely different set of mysteries called Redemptive, which I didn't know about until I searched up Redemptive Mysteries while drafting the question. Lucia takes care to clarify that his own mystery set is for contemplative purposes only and is not approved by the Church.
Does Lucian Lucia state that the Blessed Mother gave them those?
I believe, if I'm understanding this correctly, Lucian does not claim that the mother gave him that. That it's merely a set of mysteries that he developed for his own contemplative purposes. But the other redemptive mysteries uh, from Jean Clark are supposedly from the Blessed Mother.
Well, I would have an issue. Well, first of all, what am I being asked here?
I think the primary question
Take
is
on
about
this?
the Jean Clark redemptive mysteries and what your personal take on them
Yeah.
are.
Well, first of all, the redemptive mysteries. I have a no. The Rosary is about meditating on the lives of Jesus and Mary. I fail to understand how faith, reconciliation, death, judgment, and salvation are meditations upon the lives of Jesus and Mary. I you're removing yourself from the purpose of the Rosary. It's as we have traditionally understood it. I would have questions, and this person, this Gene Clark guy, is claiming essentially a private revelation when he says the Blessed Mother gave it to me. Um, you know, yeah, uh, I, I, I have my suspicions. Let's just say I have my suspicions.
Mm.
I'm not going to say. I mean, the pray. There may be nothing wrong with the prayers. I mean, saying an Our Father, 10 Hail Marys, and a Glory Be. No bishop can condemn that. You can't do it. Doesn't
Mm.
work. What you are thinking about while you are saying those prayers, what you are meditating upon, that's another separate issue, albeit related. So if you're thinking in the first decade about the theological virtue of faith, okay, but how is that rooted in meditating upon the lives of Jesus and Mary? I'm not following this. There seems to be a non sequitur here, or some kind of a step removed or something. So I don't know. I'd have to. So the Cardinal O'Malley, there may be nothing wrong with the prayers. Obviously, he's not going to condemn the prayers. Uh, and what you're meditating upon while saying these prayers We can divorce in our mind the formal vocal prayers from the meditation. We can do that theologically, but I think we have to be very careful in our pastoral practice of this. So, for instance, in the Church's theology of private revelation, she makes the distinction between the devotion and the message. So, in other words, if somebody claims the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared to me and she had this to say, and then she also wants us to say this set of prayers, the Church treats those as separate issues. The Church could say, as long as there's nothing wrong with the prayers, the Church is not going to stop people from praying certain prayers, even ones from alleged private revelation, so long as they don't contain doctrinal error. Like, for instance, may the Blessed Virgin, who once was Mary, there's problems there coming out of the Our Lady of All Nations one. And so we have to be careful with the application of this distinction between devotion and messages, because oftentimes people get the message wrong. I apologize. They misunderstand the intention. They think that the Church is approving the message when they approve the devotion. And that's why the Church says if a bishop goes with this distinction, he has to be very clear to state, I'm only approving these prayers. I'm not approving the alleged messages. But for so many people, they associate the two very closely that it's hard to separate the two. And so I personally advance that I think we need to drop that distinction. This is my personal subjective opinion. I'm not saying this is church teaching or even the practice right now. I'm simply saying I think that because of the state of affairs right now, with how bad discipline is in the church, with how prevalent social media is, I don't think it is prudent for a bishop to make that distinction between devotion and message. And so I would personally, if I was all hail Pope Kevin I, I would actually say we're gonna let that go into a bad practice. While valid, we're gonna let that fall into abeyance right now, because it's hard to keep that distinction given everything going on right now. That'd be my thought. So with respect to this present thing, I'm not familiar with it, but it sounds to me like there's no meditating on the lives of Jesus and Mary. And that's starting to tinker with a very serious aspect of the spiritual life, especially with respect to meditating upon the passion of our Lord, which is always and everywhere upheld, especially in the mystical tradition, as leading people further to prayer and communion with Christ. So that I get the impression that there's something funny there. I'm open to more information. I might be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I don't want to point out bad things, but or I don't like pointing out bad things. But I don't know. I'm not seeing a direct connection there. Something's a little different there. Like I knew a Benedictine monk who made up his own mysteries of the Rosary. It was very odd. It was in Ireland. It was on a walking rosary. He made up his own mysteries, and I was just like, I'm lost. What are you talking about? I can't even remember the specifics. Jay Terode asks, well, may I ask what they are, Kevin? I don't remember. This was several years ago. I don't remember what the guy made them up as. But I just remember thinking, like, this is really strange. I don't understand. I actually went back and said my own, because normally that would have sufficed to pray the rosary daily, right? But I was so off put by that I just went back and prayed the actual rosary because I didn't feel as though that the other one sufficed. Yeah. So yeah, I have some questions, and I'm open to learning more information. But I'm not. I get a funny feeling about it. Otherwise, so that would be my take on it. I think that was the end of the questions, right?
Yeah. So, everyone, thank you for all the questions you submitted and for sticking around for the AMA. After this, if Kevin, if you're feeling up to it, we can move everyone to another voice channel where people can hang out and ask questions and dialogue more directly. But for now, this will be the end of our AMA. Close things out. We'll go ahead and end things in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. God, we want to thank you for this time that we had together. Thank you for Kevin's responses to all these questions, for the time that he had to spend with us and go in depth on some of these topics that people wanted to know about. And we want to thank you for giving us this opportunity to learn more about you through your mother. And I think it fitting to lift up these prayers and thanksgivings through the intercession of your mother as we pray, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son.
Amen and amen.